Chapter 424. The journey was too long, and the journey was not peaceful. The news that Kuang Yi had regained his power and was promoted half a rank hadn't reached here yet. So when he saw Kuang Yi appear, Guan Ying's face was full of shock. His first feeling was that his teacher had been kicked out of the capital by Ying Zong. "Greetings, Lord Kuang." Ma Wei also broke out in a cold sweat. He also didn't know what had happened to this old minister recently. However, since he was here, he still had to be respectful. After leaving here, he would immediately send someone to the capital to find out more about Kuang Yi. Kuang Yi's eyes fell on the two's expressions. This old man, who was over 60 years old, was extremely wise and farsighted. With a single glance, he saw through the two's thoughts. Chuckling, he said, "Generals, there is no need to be surprised. This old man came to Gaozhou Prefecture under the emperor's orders." "Oh, right. The emperor empathized with my loyalty and bravery and specially conferred me the title of Grand Tutor to the Crown Prince." Guaning Ma became excited when he heard the Crown Prince's words. He clasped his hands and said, "Congratulations, teacher." "Congratulations, Lord Kuang." Ma Wei also quickly changed the way he addressed Kuang Yi. He no longer called him Lord Kuang like before, but Minister Kuang. "Congratulations to you too." Kuang Yi's wrinkled face smiled. He had seen Ma Wei's performance just now. His attitude towards these people was only perfunctory. Firstly, this was not a direct descendant that he had nurtured. And secondly, the other party was the commander of the Guangdong Guards, a martial official of the 3 ranks. If he was too close to the other party, once this news reached the court and reached the emperor's ears, who knew what kind of adverse effects it would bring? Maintaining a certain distance and only maintaining the relationship of a superior and subordinate was how an evergreen official should behave. "Teacher, something happened a few days ago. I have secretly reported it to the imperial court, but I don't think you know about it." After the pleasantries, Guaning said carefully, "What is it?" Kuang Yi had a bad feeling when he heard that Guaning had secretly reported it to the imperial court. He knew that ordinary small matters couldn't be reported, especially when the situation was so unstable. Trivial matters couldn't be reported. He also understood Guan Ying's character. Guaning was farsighted and would not be entangled over such a small matter. Now that Guaning had brought it up in such a serious manner, it could not be anything good. "Teacher, Wei Guang of the Imperial Court's Brocade Guard has died. He committed suicide in front of us." The reason for his death was, although he didn't know why Kuang Yi was here, given the current situation. If the Minister of War didn't stay in the capital to organize and command the army, but instead came to Gaozhou, a place that seemed like it was about to be abandoned, something big must have happened. Based on his analysis and intuition, Guaning believed that it had something to do with Yang Qindong and the mercenaries. Therefore, he first told him about Yang Qindong being poisoned. Guaning was indeed capable. At the very least, he had good foresight. After he finished speaking, he saw the shock on Kuang Yi's face. "Wait, what did you say? Was the Duke of Loyalty poisoned?" Wei Guang even admitted that he did it. "Well, Minister, you must be tired from traveling so far. I will go arrange for a banquet." When Ma Wei heard this, his expression changed again and again. He felt that the teacher and disciple had something important to talk about. It was really awkward for him to stand there with his status, so he found an excuse to leave. Kuang Yi was very satisfied with Ma Wei's tactfulness. However, his thoughts were more on Yang Qindong. "Guaning, how is the Duke of Loyalty?" "Not too good. I took a look at him that day. His complexion was not good, and his body was very weak," Guaning answered honestly. "Aya, what should we do?" Hearing that Yang Qindong's body was in such a bad state, Kuang Yi's expression was full of hatred. He had seen Yang Qindong countless times. This kind of young man seemed to always have an inexhaustible amount of energy. Even a small illness would not affect his body. However, from Guan Ying's description, he seemed to be like a lamp that had run out of oil. One could imagine how severe the poison was. Thinking that the southern Ming Empire's hopes were mostly placed on Yang Chendong, if something really happened to him, there would be no link between the southern Ming Empire and the mercenary army. For the current situation, it was definitely not a good thing. He said angrily, "What do the imperial bodyguards want to do? Get rid of the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness? Wei Guang alone would not have such ability and courage. There must be someone behind him." However, they did not think about it. If something really happened to Yang Chendong, who would be able to quell the Min King's rebellion? The person behind this is really... At this point, Kuang Yi stopped talking because he suddenly thought of the person behind the Imperial Secret Service. For a big matter like dealing with Yang Chendong, without that person's permission, normal people would not have the guts to act on their own. Could it be that this was really his intention? Once the thought appeared in his mind, it could not be dismissed. Thinking about it carefully, that person did have a reason to act. Yang Chendong was ultimately too young and so capable. The existence of such a person was originally a huge threat and pressure. The emperor was still young, but once he grew old and that person was still alive, would his descendants be able to suppress Yang Chendong? If they could not, what would happen? What Yang Chendong lacked now was experience and enough merit. However, he was still young. Once he was given enough power, these could be made up for. Once he had everything he needed, it would be even more difficult to control him. This led to the poisoning incident after the Huang bandit army incident was over. It seemed to make more sense. There was another problem. If it was really his intention, why did he not tell him when he received the order to come this time? Even if it was just a hint, it would be good, right? He would not let him be in such a passive position, right? It wasn't impossible to think of other ways to solve this problem, now that he had come to Gaozhou Prefecture, and was seen by so many people. It would not be long before Yang Chendong received the news. When that time came, what should he do? If he did not meet the other party, how should he talk? The emperor was afraid of him and wanted to poison him. Would he still dare to put such a person in an important position? For a moment, countless questions rose in Kuang Ye's mind, causing him to feel a headache. He originally thought that after coming to Gaozhou Prefecture and seeing Yang Chendong and promising him many benefits, he would have a chance to persuade this person to help him. But now, it seemed that everything was going to be overturned. He also felt helpless. Teacher, teacher. Seeing that Kuang Yi seemed to be in a daze, Guaning carefully called out to him, "HM, what's wrong?" Kuang Yi regained his senses and asked Guaning, "Teacher, you must have an important mission for coming here this time, but I wonder what the mission is. If you want to put the Duke of Loyalty in an important position, shouldn't you reconsider?" Guaning did not go into too much detail, but to smart people, there was no need to be so thorough. Many times, it was best to stop at a certain point. "That's right." Kuang Yi nodded, then said, "Come, bring me a brush and ink. This official wants to explain everything that happened here to the emperor. Then send someone to send it out at the fastest speed possible." The news of Kuang Ye's arrival in Gaozhou Prefecture was immediately reported by the city's security bureau to the mercenary Camp 5, Li outside the city. Tiger's Mane excitedly brought the news to the military tent. When he saw Yang Chendong, he excitedly said, "Young master, Minister Kuang Yi is here." "Haha, as you expected, we will be of great use." "He's finally here?" After hearing this, Yang Chendong's expression was calm, as if everything was within his expectations. But then he shook his head. Things have changed. Wei Guang's death, and the words that Lucy said before he died. "Even if we don't care, I'm afraid that others will." Sigh, It seems that if we want the plan to go smoothly, we have to continue pretending to be sick. Continue pretending to be sick? Why? Tiger's Mane asked with a puzzled expression. Tiger's Mane, young master, let me ask you. In your heart, are you afraid of a lively enemy or a sick enemy who could die at any time? Hearing Yang Chendong's question, Tiger's Mane was puzzled, but he still answered instinctively. Of course, it's a lively enemy. But what does this have to do with us? Tiger's Mane, who had just finished speaking, immediately shut his mouth. Obviously, he had thought of something. Seeing Tiger's Mane's enlightened expression, Yang Chendong laughed and said, "Okay, you're not too stupid. Okay, go and inform the brothers in the first and second guards. Tell them that once Kuang Yi comes, tell them to act more angry and sad. As for what to do, go and teach them. I saw that your performance last time was very good." Hearing this new mission, Tiger's Mane said with a bitter face, "Young master, it's not that my performance was good, but your acting last time was too good, so much so that I believed it was true." "All right, then let's do as you say." Yang Chendong laughed loudly. He casually sent Tiger's Mane away, then picked up the pen and continued to write a letter home. The letter was written to Su Mon, who had already been sent to Crimson City. The two of them had only been together for a short while, but because of some things, they had no choice but to separate. They were like newlyweds. It was impossible to say that they did not miss each other. Of course, writing a letter to Su Mon was not a privilege that only she enjoyed. For example, second Madame Chiao Yin and fourth Madame Lady Xiang, who were in the Yang family manor in the capital, would also communicate with Yang Chendong from time to time. Even Luan Xiaoyu, who had always been in Crimson City, would also communicate with Yang Chendong from time to time. But this time, when he wrote to Su Mon, Yang Chendong did not say any words of love. Instead, he told her in detail about how he had pretended to be poisoned. He also said that he had arranged for people to keep an eye on the capital and Nanjing of the southern Ming dynasty. He wanted to see if there was anyone who could redress the Su family's reputation. If there was, then it was worth it for him to pretend to be sick. On the other hand, it would mean that the other party did not keep their promises. Since that was the case, he would have to seek justice himself. Chapter 4:25. Early the next morning, an unexpected guest arrived at the mercenaries' camp. Guaning and Ma Wei were standing behind the old man. As soon as they appeared, the gate of the mercenary camp was opened. Commander Luo came to greet them in person. "Greetings, Minister Kuang." Tiger's Mane stepped forward and saluted. "My young master knew that you would come, so he asked me to wait here to greet you. Please come with me." "Okay." Kuang Yi nodded, and then said to Guaning and Ma Wei behind him, "You two stay here. When you have time, you can learn how to lead troops from Commander Luo. I'm going to visit Duke Zhongdan." "Teacher, this..." Guaning seemed to be worried and wanted to say something, but Kuang Yi waved his hand and then followed Tiger's Mane to the depths of the camp. In the largest tent, Yang Chendong had finished his makeup, which made Hu Yen and Madame Shui exclaim in surprise. "Lu Lang, your skill is so powerful. It really looks like you have suffered a serious internal injury." Hu Yen looked amazed, and her hand couldn't help but touch Yang Chendong's face. Yang Chendong quickly dodged to the left and right to avoid her touch. Yang Chendong had practiced the art of makeup a lot in his previous life. Sometimes, in order to complete a task, he had to disguise himself as various people. Not only did he have to look good, but he also had to learn how to disguise himself. Otherwise, how could he fool others? "Yes, my husband looks so haggard now. If I didn't know the truth, I would believe it." Madame Shui also stared at Yang Chendong's face, trying to find a flaw. However, no matter how hard she looked, she couldn't find the problem. It seemed that Yang Chendong was really sick. No matter how thick-skinned he was, Yang Qindong felt a little embarrassed when the two women stared at him like this. He changed the topic and said, "Your husband is well prepared. It will depend on your performance later. You always talk about how good you are at acting. This time, it's time to test you. Don't screw up." "What do you mean by screw up?" Hu Yan asked with interest. It means don't screw up," Yang Qindong explained awkwardly. "Oh, then we won't let you down," Hu Yan and Madame Shui said in unison. They understood what Madame Shui said. At this moment, Beta Persei rushed in. "Young master, Tiger's Head and Minister Qi are here." "Oh." As soon as he said this, there was a sad cry. Who else could it be but Hu Yan and Madame Shui? The show began. After a smile appeared on Yang Qindong's mouth, his body also lay down on the bed. It seemed that even breathing was very laborious. Young Air stared at the scene in front of him with his mouth agape. He thought to himself, as expected, birds of a feather flock together. Look, this family is full of acting experts. I still have to learn from them, but I don't know if I can learn a thing or two from them in this life. Outside the tent, Hu Mang finally led Kuang Yi into the tent, and what he saw was this very sad scene. There were cries and sighs, and there was even blood in the spittoon beside the bed. It seemed that Yang Qindong had just vomited blood not long ago. Loyal and courageous Duke, how did you become like this?" Even though he was mentally prepared, he had heard Guan Ying explain Yang Qindong's condition in detail yesterday. But this morning, he still came to take a look because he was worried. Originally, he came with doubts, but the moment he entered the tent, the situation changed completely. He even felt sad for some reason. He could not help but think that some people were too much. This was a hero of the southern Ming Empire. How could they treat him like this? Beta Persei lowered his head and said nothing. He moved a chair to the side of the bed, as if to let Kuang Yi sit down. But the sound of the chair slamming on the ground showed his attitude towards Kuang Yi. He was extremely unwelcome. "Beta Persei, don't be rude." Yang Qindong, who was on the bed, opened his eyes with great effort and scolded softly. Then he forced a smile and said to Kuang Yi, "Minister Qi is here. Hurry, take a seat. You can leave too. Cough, cough, cough." With the help of Hu Yan and Lady Shui, Yang Qindong got up with great effort and sat down with his back against a large futon. Then Hu Yan and the others tactfully left. Beta Persei did not want to leave, but Yang Qindong said, "You can leave. Minister Qi is a good person. He won't harm me." Beta Persei reluctantly left the tent. Kuang Ye's face turned red when he heard that he wouldn't harm him. Of course, he knew what Yang Qindong meant. Kuang Yi felt sad when he thought about how the originally handsome and lively young man had been plotted against and ended up like this. He thought about how he had been wronged when he was ordered to stay at home to recuperate. The words, "Heaven's might is unpredictable," involuntarily entered Kuang Ye's heart. Although he felt indignant, in Kuang Ye's heart, the emperor was the emperor. He could not let anyone question him, not even himself. After suppressing the complicated emotions in his heart, he looked at Yang Qindong with a face full of concern. "Duke Shongdan, regarding the matter of Wei Guang's poisoning, I have already written an urgent letter to the capital. I will definitely give you an explanation. Forget it. He's already dead. Besides, Minister Kuang, do you really think he has the guts to do all this?" Yang Qindong's question hit the nail on the head, leaving Kuang Yi speechless. If he said no, it would be the same as criticizing the emperor. If he said yes, it would be an insult to his and Yang Qindong's intelligence. This was a question that couldn't be answered and couldn't be answered. Kuang Yi sighed and did not dwell on this question. Instead, he spoke in a comforting tone for Yang Qindong. Duke Shongdan, you have been wronged recently. I also heard that some people are still calling you Duke of Loyalty and Courage. I was angry about this and gave the order. Although your title of Duke of Loyalty and Courage was given by King Yu, since we have recognized him as the Daizong, his title is naturally reasonable. If anyone dares to call him that in the future, you can punish them. Kuang Yi was trying to comfort Yang Qindong by saying that he was on Yang Qindong's side. However, he was only on Yang Qindong's side psychologically. Many people would often say, "You are a good person, and I support you spiritually." However, Yang Qindong did not need such a good person card. Politics was not a game. It was not a matter of good for you, good for me, good for everyone. In order to achieve their own ideals, those who opposed could become mortal enemies. It was common to even fight with swords. Just because you're a good person, how can you lower your head and accept everything when you've been wronged? Therefore, after listening to Kuang Ye's words, Yang Qindong quickly counterattacked. "Sai, it's just a title of duke. It's not like Prince Shiping was given the title of prince. There's no need to be so calculative." Hiss! A cold breath came from the bottom of his heart and went straight to his head. Kuang Yi widened his eyes and looked at Yang Qindong in disbelief. There was hesitation and doubt in his eyes, but more than that, there was fear and horror. This young man actually wanted the title of prince and envied Prince Mubin of Shiping. However, did he not know that since the establishment of the great Ming dynasty, Mubin was the only prince with a different surname who was still alive? There was only one prince after so many years. Yang Qindong actually wanted to be one of them. His courage and desire were beyond the reach of ordinary people. It was no wonder that the emperor was wary of him. For such an ambitious person, even if Kuang Yi was in the emperor's position, he would also be wary of him. He might even do something regardless of the consequences. Kuang Yi was stunned. In Yang Qindong's eyes, he forced a smile on his pale face. "Minister Kuang, it's just a joke. You don't believe it, do you?" "Haha, how could that be?" This old man was just amazed by the courage of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Kuang Yi chuckled perfunctorily. However, in his heart, he thought, "Who would believe that you are joking? How can some things be taken as a joke?" In just a few words, Yang Qindong had already stated his expectations. This also made Kuang Yi realize that after using him last time, he threw him to the side and even sent someone to poison him. He was afraid that he had already hurt his feelings. If he wanted to use him to send troops, he would have to pay a heavy price. The position of prince was one of the requirements. Even though he had expected Yang Qindong to demand an exorbitant price when he invited him again, he did not expect such an outrageous request. At this moment, even Kuang Yi wanted to retreat. Today's trip was to see the condition of Yang Qindong's body. If possible, he wanted to test whether he could continue to lead the mercenaries to work for the great Ming dynasty. He originally thought that it would be difficult to achieve the second requirement. After all, it was a bit comical to talk about sending troops in front of a sick person. However, Yang Qindong's initiative allowed these two requirements to be met. It was just that the results were not very satisfactory. As if he knew that Kuang Ye's probing had achieved its goal, or perhaps Yang Qindong's body was really not good, and he had reached his body's limit for receiving guests for so long. At this moment, he began to cough again, and could not stop. This caused Hu Yen and the others, who were waiting outside the tent, to quickly rush in. Chapter 4:26. As soon as these people came in, Kuang Yi knew that he had to leave. He wanted to see if there were any other ways to solve the problem. But when he saw Yang Qindong's attitude and his current physical condition, he knew that it was meaningless to say anything more. Kuang Yi left. Just like when he came, Tiger's Mane sent him out of the barracks. Yang Qindong stopped coughing, shook his head, and said, "It's hard work to pretend to be sick. I hope I can fool this old guy." His words made both Hu Yen and Madame Shui laugh. This was their husband. When he was serious, he was a little scary, but sometimes he was very cute. Yang Qindong did this to deceive Kuang Yi, and he also took the opportunity to put forward his request. In fact, Kuang Yi was indeed deceived. Yang Qindong's makeup skills were too good, or it could be said that the things in the warehouse were too good, so good that they could not be found in this era. That was why he could deceive everyone. "Teacher, how is Duke Zhongdan's condition?" On the way back to the city, Guaning asked in a low voice. When he saw Kuang Ye's gloomy face after leaving the barracks, he felt a little nervous. After all, a while ago, he was not respectful to Yang Qindong, and even wanted to trick him. What he did was likely to ruin his teacher's plan, and he was a little worried about it. "He's really sick," Kuang Yi answered in a low voice, and the image of Yang Qindong's terminally ill flashed in his mind. Then, "I wonder if I can still lead troops into battle?" Guaning continued to ask in a low voice. This was the main point he was concerned about. He had already received the news that King of Min's faction had begun to deploy troops and generals while stabilizing the current results. They were preparing to expand the results of the war. As one of the occupied areas, Guangdong was obviously intolerable. That was to say, even if they did not take the initiative to attack, it would not be long before King Min took the initiative to deal with them. Lead the army to fight? Kuang Yi shook his head. Who knows? However, if you want him to fight, you have to agree to one of his conditions. You have to become a king like Shiping Wang Mubin. Kuang Yi whispered when he saw that no one else was around. What? Crown king? Guaning almost couldn't hold himself back and yelled out. However, he quickly shut his mouth. From his expression, it could be seen that he was frightened as well. Who was Mubin? He was the descendant of the Mu family and had been loyal for generations. He was forced to be a king because he was going to pacify Yunnan this time. However, from the looks of it now, it did not seem to be of much use. This was because the commander-in-chief knew that the failure of Dongxing, this stupid teammate, had prevented him from unleashing his full strength. But in any case, Mu Bin, who was crowned as a king, was like a nail nailed to the back of King of Min, so that they could not attack Nanjing with all their strength. From this point of view, the crowning as a king had some effect. Who was Yang Qindong? Although he was also the descendant of the Yang family, and was also a loyal family, he just saved the leader of the mercenaries by coincidence. He did not have any real power in his hands, so why should he be a king? Of course, it was a bit too much to say why. After all, Yang Qindong saved Ingzong's life and defeated the Walla's invasion on behalf of Ingzong. Now, he had the merit of pacifying the chaos in Guangdong, which was also a great achievement. But because of this, he could not be a king casually. Everything was because he was too powerful. He was so powerful that it was a little scary. Unlike Mu Bin, whose influence was only in Yunnan, he was nothing outside of Yunnan. Because of Yang Qindong's power, once he was crowned as a king, it was hard to predict what the consequences would be. Thinking of this, Guaning did not dare to say anything. And these were also seen by Kuang Yi. He could not help but sigh in his heart. There were some people in the great Ming dynasty who were crowned as kings, such as Zhongshan Prince Suda, Kaiping Prince Chang Yechen, Chiang Prince Li Wenzhong, Ningyi Prince Deng Yu, Dongwo Prince Tang, He, Qianing Prince Muing, and now Shiping Prince Mubin. But except for the last one, the others were all crowned as kings after they died. Yang Qindong was a living person. When he thought of living people, he could not help but think of Yang Qindong's weak body. Kuang Yi thought in his heart that perhaps this person would not live for long. In this case, crowning him as a king did not seem to be an unrealistic idea. Kuang Ye's heart became hesitant at first. When he was sure that Yang Chendong was seriously ill, the idea of crowning him as a king was born. Of course, he also knew that such a big matter could not be decided by himself. He still needed to ask the emperor for instructions. And so, after sending out the urgent letter yesterday, another urgent letter was sent out after he returned to the study of the Gaozhou government. Ping in Beijing, Japan. The imperial city of Japan was also called the Imperial Palace of the Great Inner City. It represented the highest power in Japan and was also the political, cultural, and economic center of the country. As the 102nd Emperor of Japan, Yenren was known as the Emperor of the Garden. This kind of name was very common in Japan. The people here were also very used to naming people after places, such as the foot of the mountain, the mouth of the river, the bridge, and so on. The Emperor of Japan was originally the most noble existence in this country. In fact, this was indeed the case to the outside world. Many orders were issued by the Emperor of the Garden and known to the people. But in reality, Yenren was more of a puppet-like existence. At least in some matters, he had to look at other people's faces and listen to other people's opinions before he could make the final decision. As a descendant of the royal family, Yenren naturally did not want to disgrace the name of the emperor. In private, he had been working hard to change this situation. This was why he sent his favorite daughter, Princess Junko, to the Great Ming dynasty. At that time, the Great Ming dynasty was very powerful to the outside world. At least, it was far from what Japan could compare to. They still had to look up to this big country in the east. After Princess Junko was sent out, some information came back through various channels. But most of it was about the princess's experience in the northern capital of the Great Ming dynasty. The most mentioned person was a young man called Yang Chendong. The letter said that Yang Chendong was only in his early 20s, but he had already been conferred the title of duke and had a lot of influence in the Great Ming dynasty. Regarding the records in this letter, Yenren naturally had a feeling of dislike towards Yang Chendong. It was not because of anything else. In his eyes, if such a person continued to develop, he would often become a powerful minister, just like General Ashikaga Yoshimasa. It was just that no matter whether Yenren liked Yang Chendong or not, when Xiao Lin suddenly came to the palace and brought back an important news, the emperor was finally shaken and had a better understanding of the name Yang Chendong. In a secret room deep in the palace, this place was not known to outsiders. Those who could come here were all very important people trusted by the emperor. Xiao Lin was able to appear here because of a piece of news he brought back, as well as the handwritten letter he took out from Princess Junko. When Junko left Japan, she and her father had agreed on some of the secret words in the letter. In other words, on the surface, there was nothing wrong with some of the letters. But only the father and daughter could see the authenticity of the letter and whether it was written under coercion. The letter that Xiao Lin brought was naturally out of Junko's sincerity, and the contents of the letter were not fake. This was something that Emperor Yenren could see at a glance. It was precisely because this letter was real that Emperor Yenren was even more shocked. After carefully reading the letter 3 times, he said with a serious face, "Little Lin Kuan, please tell me the truth about what you saw and heard." "Huh." Xiao Lin nodded, and then told him in detail how he met Yang Chendong for the first time with the princess, how he was chased and had to live in the Yang family village, and everything he saw later. It took more than an hour for Xiao Lin to finish telling the story. Then he looked at Yenren, who should be respected the most in Japan, and said, "Your Majesty, this Duke of Zhongdan is the most powerful and capable young man I have ever seen. It seems that there is nothing he can't do, and there seems to be nothing he can't solve." "Wait, you mean he's very powerful? How is he compared to the general?" Hearing this, Yenren interrupted and asked, "He should be stronger than him. After all, when he was young, The general wasn't as powerful as he is now. Xiao Lin only hesitated for a moment before giving the answer quickly. Swish, 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 swish. Yanren seemed to be very satisfied with such an answer and kept nodding his head. "Oh, right. Tell me about the cannon." It was no wonder that he asked this question. A cannon was priced at 10 million taels of silver. Yanren believed that his daughter, Junko, knew what this amount of money meant, but she still wrote it in the letter and suggested to buy one. It was no wonder that Yanren valued it so much. This, in front of the emperor, Xiao Lin naturally didn't dare to hide anything. "Your Majesty, I have never seen the cannon when it was fired, but I have seen the terrible consequences after it was fired." Terrible consequences? Yes, it was like a barren land, as if the heavens were angry. Xiao Lin tried his best to describe the scene after he saw the cannon blast on Kurajing Street. However, Emperor Yanren's expression changed again and again when he heard these words. In his mind, he seemed to have sketched out a very shocking scene, and this scene was soon installed in the general's mansion. It was as if a cannon blast could kill Ashikaga Yoshimasa, and he would regain control of the highest authority in Japan. "I'll raise the money now, and I'll leave the contact with the mercenaries to you. Don't let me down." Finally, Yanren made up his mind. Although 10 million taels of silver was a huge burden to him, in order to regain control of the country, he agreed without hesitation. "Ha-ee." Xiao Lin nodded excitedly. With such a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, he could imagine that once he succeeded, he would be put in an important position. By then, he might even stand at the top of Japan. Chapter 427. The mercenary camp outside Gaozhou Prefecture. The Emperor of Japan agreed to buy cannons and prepared 10 million taels of silver for this purpose. The news had already been sent to him. After reading it, Yang Qindong only ordered everything to proceed according to plan and handed it over to Commander Gao Xiong to handle. He threw this piece of information aside. Compared to Japan, which was far away at sea, Yang Qindong was more concerned about the situation in front of him. He was more concerned about whether or not he could be crowned king. Originally, Yang Qindong did not have such extravagant hopes. He only thought about how to use war to expand his military strength and get more things he needed. After all, if Lung Feng wanted to develop, it would not be possible without a sufficient population base. He did not want to use outsiders and trusted the Han people more, so he could only set his sights on the great Ming. Facts had also proven that war was indeed the best way to test the strength of an army. At the same time, it was also the best opportunity to expand the army. He had obtained so many soldiers and taels of silver just by wiping out a motley crew of yellow bandits with only a few 100,000 people. This made Yang Qindong see the benefits that war could bring to him. However, he did not expect that the situation in Yunnan was so critical that Ingzong Qizhen threw aside the laws of the ancestors and gave Marquis Shiping the title of King of Shiping. One should not underestimate this title of king with a different surname. Once he had the identity of a king, he could open his own mansion and have his own army. Although the number of people could not exceed 3,000, for Yang Qindong, once he had this kind of power, there were probably not many places in the world that he could not go. There were too many benefits to becoming a king, so it was not an example. This made Yang Qindong very excited. However, he also knew that even if Mu Bin could be crowned king with a different surname, it was only a special event in a special period. It was not hereditary, so it was destined that the title of King of Shiping was only effective on Mu Bin. Otherwise, his descendants would not be able to enjoy such treatment. Even Mu Bin had so many backup plans when he was crowned king. If he wanted to be crowned king, it would be even more difficult. Not to mention that Zhu Qizhen had always been afraid of him. In this regard, The two brothers, Zhu Qizhen and Zhu Qiyu, had the same attitude. However, with the example before him, no matter how difficult it was, Yang Qindong had to fight for it. To him, this was definitely an opportunity. In the words of the commoners, if they missed this opportunity, they might not be able to find it again. With this goal in mind, when Kuang Yi came to visit him, he mentioned that he was very envious of Kuang Yi being conferred the title of king. At the same time, he pretended to be seriously ill in order to increase the chances of this matter becoming a reality. Of course, if he really wanted Zhu Qizhen to relent, just doing this was not enough. In other words, the more complicated the situation on the battlefield was, the more danger the southern Ming Empire was in, and the higher the chances of success would be. Therefore, during these days, Yang Qindong had been paying attention to the movement of Prince of Min's faction. After waiting for days and nights, they finally made a move. The Miao people were the first to react. This time, the Prince of Min's faction was able to defeat the southern Ming army and progress at lightning speed. The Miao people's help was completely inseparable. It was because of the Miao family's courage to fight, kill, and charge that the southern Ming army was defeated and lost a large amount of territory and land in a very short period of time. At that time, there was no such thing as 56 ethnic groups being one family. As a minority, they were often limited from birth. Their birth meant that they would not have much success in their lives. Things like being high up in the imperial court, that was something that they did not even want to think about. As a result, each generation was worse than the previous generation. In addition to the bad living environment, the lives of the Miao people were getting worse day by day. It was not until Zhu Qizhen established the southern Ming dynasty in Nanjing that he increased taxes in order to achieve his goal of recuperating faster. This made the Miao people, who did not have a good life to begin with, live an abyss of suffering under the heavy burden. Wherever there was oppression, there would be resistance. Just as the Miao family was suffering, the Prince of Min's messenger came and promised many benefits, which made some of the leaders of the Miao family tempted. After that, they started the war. When they left their hometown and went all the way to Guangdong, they finally knew what was called wealth. In comparison, it seemed that their previous lives were too poor. Under sudden wealth, it would often make a person dizzy and change their way of doing things. This was the case for the Miao army. They didn't have to spend much effort to take down a few cities. After grabbing a lot of good things, the greed in their hearts couldn't be suppressed. Gradually, they started to like the feeling of looting. The main force of the Prince of Min's faction was still digesting the cities in their hands and constantly recruiting soldiers to consolidate their strength. When the Jiaoji army was taking down cities, they did not forget to transfer good things, and some people to their own country. Only the Miao army did not care about cities and did not think about conquering the world. They were more interested in the benefits in front of them. It could be said that they were short-sighted or unambitious. In short, they were the fiercest when it came to attacking cities. Often, after taking down a city, they would loot for a few days. Then they would leave the city and move on to a new target, continuing the pace of attacking cities. As they looted and moved, it was the Miao family who had the least number of people that caused the most damage. In less than a month, they had destroyed more than a dozen cities and state capitals, and the number of people affected by the disaster had reached more than 1 million. The Miao army, which was divided into several groups, was like a swarm of locusts. Wherever they went, the crops would be destroyed, and the people would be displaced. Supposedly, the south of the Great Ming dynasty had not experienced any wars for many years. The people were still rich. If it were other armies that came here, it would not be difficult to raise military provisions. However, the bad thing was that the people who came were Miao people. Not only did they snatch food, money, and women, They also burned the things that they could not eat. It was as if they were venting their poor lives over the years. Such actions naturally caused the number of victims in Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong provinces to increase. Later on, when many people found out about the Miao Army's actions, they did not wait for the Miao Army to attack and left their homes with their families. Although people were not willing to leave the hometown that they had lived in for a long time compared to being able to live, more people chose to leave home. Only a portion of the elderly, who were old and had bad legs, chose to stay. They looked like they would die in their hometown, even if they died. The disaster of the Miao Army was not inferior to the disaster of the Great Ming dynasty. This point was quickly reached and was publicly announced in the main hall of the Southern Ming dynasty. Wang Zhuo and a few other senior officials also wrote to the emperor, requesting that the emperor send troops to deal with the Miao Army to save the people from this disaster. Some of these people were sincerely loyal to the country, and some were because their ancestral homes were in the 3 provinces. Among them, there were some officials who were unlucky. Their hometowns were occupied, and their fields were occupied by the Miao Army. In their anger, they naturally hoped that the emperor would send troops to encircle them and help them regain everything that they had lost. There were more and more memorials asking for troops, covering the entire dragon table. Zhu Qizhen's expression also became more and more ugly. How could he not want to send troops to deal with the rebellion? But first, he had to have the strength to do so. The Great Ming dynasty, especially the south, had not seen soldiers for a long time. From the results of Kuang Ye's previous inspection, after many years of recuperation, some of the southern Ming dynasty guards had some soldiers that could be used. However, they had their own mission. Guarding their own territory was their heavy responsibility. If they were to transfer these soldiers now and gather them to deal with the King of Min's rebellion, if there were too few people, there would be no effect on the overall situation. If there were too many people, the rear would be empty and there would be new rebellions. If that was the case, the southwest would change and the southeast would have trouble. Then the southern Ming regime would be in danger. Robbing the east wall to pay the west wall. If the west wall collapsed because of this, the gains would not make up for the losses. But if they did not transfer troops, they would not be able to solve the problem at hand. Although the Ministry of War had already started to recruit soldiers, it still needed a certain amount of time. At this time, Kuang Ye's second urgent report was sent to Zhu Qizhen's desk. This report was about yesterday's matter of the brocade guard. After Wei Guang committed suicide, it emphasized that Yang Qindong was poisoned and that it was important to send troops to learn from Mu Bin and be crowned king. Trash. A bunch of trash. In the throne room, Zhu Qizhen, who had read the report, raised his hand and threw the urgent report to the head eunuch Chao Jixiang, who was serving him. Your Majesty, please calm down. Take care of your dragon body. Chao Jixiang still didn't know what had happened, so he knelt down on the ground with a frightened look. Calm down, calm down. Every day, you only know how to calm down my anger. But you have to do something that makes me happy. That Wei Guang, not only did he fail to kill Mu Bin, but he also admitted everything. Not only did he cause me to be labeled as a meritorious official, but now he wants the throne from me. Tell me, should I give it to him or not? Zhu Qizhen, whose face was livid, roared and stared at Chao Jixiang to express his dissatisfaction. Chao Jixiang's face instantly paled. Your Majesty, does Yang Qindong want to be crowned king? Who else could it be other than him? Zhu Qizhen's voice implied this fact. That won't do. Hearing this, Chao Jixiang's eyes kept darting around as he spoke. Hearing Chao Jixiang say no, Zhu Qizhen became interested. My dear minister, why do you say no? Chao Jixiang, who was kneeling on the ground, quickly crawled forward and came to Zhu Qizhen's feet. He raised his head and said with a loyal expression, "Your Majesty, it's a rule set by our ancestors that people with different surnames cannot be crowned king. King Shiping is an exception, but it turns out that it's not very useful to be crowned king with different surnames. Moreover, if we give it to whoever wants it, the world will be in chaos. Once the world is at peace, how will we deal with them? I'm afraid we can't get rid of them." Chapter 428. Chao Jixiang's voice was still echoing in Zhu Qizhen's ears, but the unlucky Emperor Ingzong didn't say anything. From the moment Mu Bin became the king of Shiping, he knew that some things were out of his control. Once he was bestowed the title of prince, it was equivalent to having his own prince's mansion and even his own guard army. Although the number of people could not be too large, the mountain was high, and the emperor was far away. Who knew if there was a restless heart under the surface of obedience? Especially a king who became a king by fighting, who had killed a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, had more specific military strength that couldn't be underestimated. But if he wasn't a king, how could they do their best? Marquis Mu Bin of Shiping was already the boss of Yunnan. There was nothing left to be conferred, nothing to be rewarded. If he wanted to use him as a bystander, there was no other way except for this move. He had no choice but to do this, although the effect was not very good. In any case, with Mu Bin watching from the rear, it also took a lot of energy from King Min's side, so they couldn't attack the hinterland of the south. A king's title only played a role of restraint. Zhu Qizhen was a little dissatisfied in his heart, but what could he do? He was the emperor, the son of heaven, but if he didn't have enough strength, how many people would listen to him? For the emperor, being a king for the sake of fighting was tantamount to giving away part of his power, which might be regarded as a disgrace. At the very least, none of his ancestors had ever done such a thing, but it was still better than being forced to perish. If he persisted for the sake of face, and finally let King Min's side come to Nanjing, at that time he would really be a sinner of the Zhu family, and he would have no face to see his ancestors. Thinking that the current situation was so erosive and difficult, Zhu Qizhen began to seriously consider what Kuang Yi said about Yang Qindong's proposal. "My dear minister, how is Duke Zhongdan's health? Also, I asked you to find a way to contact the mercenaries. Is there any progress?" When these things were mentioned, Chao Jixiang's face became very ugly. He who was originally clamoring that he couldn't be conferred the title of king quickly lowered his head and said, "Your Majesty, please calm down. This subject is incompetent." Chao Jixiang couldn't be blamed for saying that. Whether it was Yang Qindong or the mercenaries, the embroidered uniform guard hadn't made any progress in such a long time. Needless to say, the mercenaries had perfect military discipline. Furthermore, the soldiers who were qualified to serve in Crimson City had all been seriously tested in terms of loyalty. In addition, they did not go out on their own, so it was even more difficult for outsiders to find out about them. Even though the embroidered uniform guards seemed to be everywhere, they were unable to do anything in the face of such a disciplined army. Naturally, it was difficult for them to achieve any results. As for Yang Qindong's place, it was heavily guarded. Even the auxiliary troops could not get close. Only the elite cold vanguard, who had gone through many trials and tribulations, had the right to guard outside. Not to mention, there were also the first and second guards, the elites of the elites. Under such heavy protection, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens to investigate Yang Qindong's condition. The embroidered uniform guard had sent out many people, but most of them returned empty-handed. On the contrary, quite a few of them had gone missing. Chao Jixiang's words of incompetence expressed his helplessness toward Yang Qindong and the mercenaries. His words enraged Zhu Qizhen once again. "Incompetent, incompetent. Do you not know what else to say other than this? Scram, scram." "Yes, yes." Seeing that Zhu Qizhen was enraged again, Chao Jixiang, who knew that accompanying a monarch was like accompanying a tiger, immediately knelt and left. Zhu Qizhen was the emperor of the great Ming dynasty, second only to one and above all. He had inherited the legacy of his ancestors, but at the same time, he had also inherited his ancestors' temperament, which was capricious. Who knew if he would punish Cao Jixiang in a fit of rage? Cao Jixiang left the hall, and the other eunuchs lowered their heads, not daring to speak. Not long after, a heavy sigh filled the hall. No one knew what the so-called true dragon, the son of heaven, was thinking at this moment. Gaozhou Prefecture. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, sent 2 urgent secret letters to Emperor Ingzong, but he did not receive any reply even after a long time. At this time, extremely bad news spread over. The leader of the Heavenly Fortress camp, Miao Jinlong, who was given the title of Marquis by the Min King, was leading 80,000 troops from the Nanning Prefecture. The moment Kuang Yi received the news, he hurriedly summoned his generals to the front of the hall. At this moment, Ma Wei, Guan Ying Guang, and the other generals all had ugly expressions. Below the hall, the scout general was reporting the battle reports he had received. Miao Jinlong's troops are very good at fighting. In terms of strength, they are second only to Yang Wenba of the Duming stronghold. Since the start of the war, they had already taken over 4 cities and cities. Among them, the number of small counties that they had taken over was uncountable. Their army had also expanded from 10,000 people to 80,000 now. They are currently attacking the Lianzhou Prefecture and are not far from us. How many people are there in the Lianzhou Prefecture? Kuang Yi asked directly. Only 1,000. The scout general did not even dare to raise his head. Hiss. Kuang Yi, who took in a cold breath, knew that Lianzhou could not be defended. 1,000 against 80,000, the result could be imagined. Report. Right at this moment, another scout entered the hall and whispered something into the ears of the general, who was kneeling on the ground. The scout general's expression changed again and again. He then waved his hand and waited for his subordinates to leave. He said with a panicked expression, "I just received news that the general of the Lianzhou Prefecture has surrendered." What? Kuang Yi, who had suddenly heard the latest battle report, staggered and fell to the side before losing his balance. Luckily, Guaning reacted quickly and stretched out his hands to catch him. He also anxiously shouted, Teacher, are you okay?" I'm fine. Kuang Yi, who took in a strong breath, his chest heaved up and down a few times. Then he steadied himself and waved his hand at Guaning. Then he angrily scolded, "Bastards, a bunch of bastards." They received the kindness of the emperor and did not think of repaying it. They should be killed, their families should be wiped out, and their families should be wiped out. Kuang Yi angrily scolded. Unfortunately, the general of the Lianzhou Prefecture could not hear him. Even if he heard it, he would not be afraid. After all, he had already surrendered. Who knew how long the South Ming could last? "Teacher, please calm down. Now that the Lianzhou Prefecture has fallen, the next target will probably be our Gaozhou Prefecture. As for how to deal with it, I need, teacher, to think." Guaning saw that Kuang Yi could stand up on his own and took 2 steps back. "Deal with it? What else can we do? We have to defend the Gaozhou Prefecture to the death. With me here, we will not let these traitors take a step forward." Even though Savage Kuang was old, his voice was like thunder. Kuang Yi had made the decision to defend the city to the death. As a student, Guaning immediately cupped his hands and said, "Student is willing to follow teacher and defend the Gaozhou Prefecture to the death." Guan Ying's words were heard by Ma Wei and Yu Guang. The 2 exchanged a glance before cupping their fists and saying, "We will follow the orders of the minister and defend Gaozhou Prefecture to the death. We will fight to the death and not retreat. Ma Wei and Yu Guang did not have a choice. Even though they were in the Gaozhou prefecture, their families were not here. Their original place of defense was not Gaozhou. If they really surrendered like the Lianzhou prefecture general, once the news spread, their families would not be able to survive. Even if it was for the safety of their families, they had no other choice. Furthermore, with the minister of the Ministry of War here, even if they wanted to surrender, they had to be able to control the army. Hearing the words of the generals, Kuang Ye's expression became better. Good, good. His Majesty will definitely know of your loyalty. After we defeat the enemy this time, this official will definitely ask for rewards for all of you. Thank you, Minister. Guan Ying and the other two lowered their heads and cupped their hands. However, whether or not they would really listen to this so-called request for merit was another matter altogether. First, they agreed. Then, Kuang Yi wrote an urgent letter to be sent to Nanjing. After reporting the situation here, he looked at Guan Ying and the other two and said, "Immediately seal the city. At the same time, gather the youths in the city and help the soldiers defend the city." In the Gaozhou prefecture, there were at least 40,000 people. Among them, there were 5,000 youths. If used well, it would be a significant force. Teacher, should we inform the Duke of Loyalty and ask him to come to the city to help us defend the city? When Guan Ying saw that Kuang Yi didn't mention Yang Qindong, he thought that Kuang Yi was too anxious to remember, so he reminded him. Them? Sai, we can just send someone to inform them. However, if they are not willing to enter the city, we cannot force them. Kuang Yi thought about Yang Qindong's request and shook his head as he said half-heartedly. He didn't think that the little fox Yang Qindong would be willing to help him defend Gaozhou prefecture before he received a confirmation. Outside the Gaozhou prefecture, in the mercenary camp near the Liizhou prefecture, the battle report from the front line had already been sent here. Yang Qindong naturally knew that Miao Jinlong had led the troops here. Ah, they are finally here? Yang Qindong's attitude was completely different from Kuang Ye's. When he heard this, he didn't panic at all. Instead, he looked as if he already knew this would happen. "Young master, are we going to beat them up?" Hu Mang, who was standing at the side, asked excitedly. From his words, it was not whether they should fight or not, but whether they should beat them up. Just this point alone showed how confident he was in winning. Actually, it was not only Tiger's Mane. The 7,000 young army soldiers all thought the same. The auxiliary soldiers of the Cold Front were even more so. With their advanced weapons, they could look down on the world and not reject any strong enemy. Even the temporary auxiliary soldiers were full of confidence after being trained for such a long time and learning excellent tactics. They only wanted to gain military merits in one battle and become an auxiliary soldier. They wanted to become a member of the elite Cold Vanguard as soon as possible and be envied by everyone. Chapter 429. Why do we have to fight? Yang Qindong tilted his head and asked after hearing Tiger's Mane's words. Tiger's Mane didn't know how to answer the young master's question. Fortunately, Yang Qindong didn't point at him to answer. Instead, he said slowly, young master's goal was to force Zhu Qizhen to bow his head. Isn't the appearance of these people the best time to do so? If we chase them away right away, the problem will be solved. How can we force them to bow? Yes, young master is right. Tiger's Mane is too naive. Tiger's Mane was smart. After being pointed out by Yang Qindong, he understood everything and immediately replied, It's good that you know. Pass down the order. The camp will be in a defensive formation. Without orders, no one is allowed to leave the camp. Also, inform the logistics to prepare enough food and be prepared for a long standoff. Yang Qindong knew that Ming wasn't the only one who wanted to send out troops. He was afraid that all the officers would have the same idea. Thus, he passed down the order. Once a real and effective military order was formed, Lang Feng, who prioritized obeying orders, knew what to do. Just as Yang Qindong was passing down the order, Guanning came to the camp as a representative of Nanming. He wanted to meet Yang Qindong and invite him to Gaozhou Prefecture to avoid trouble. As expected, Guanning didn't even see Yang Qindong's face before Ming sent him away. My young master's condition has worsened. He is not fit for any exercise. We appreciate Master Guan's kindness. We will stay here and guard the young master's body. When he recovers, we will leave. These words left Guanning speechless. He could only hope that after the Miao army arrived and failed to take down Gaozhou Prefecture, they would make an example out of these mercenaries. This way, they could just sit back and watch the tigers fight. Gaozhou Prefecture and Yang Qindong's troops had all made defensive preparations. 3 days later, Miao Jinlong's 80,000 soldiers finally appeared in the southwest. Miao Jinlong was from the Miao tribe and was born in a big family. He had practiced martial arts since he was young and was familiar with the art of war. He had also seen many instances of the Ming dynasty's army bullying the Miao people. He had always wanted to fight for the rights of the Miao people one day and hold his head high. However, the great Ming dynasty was too powerful. How could the Miao tribe, who had a weak population and territory, contend against them? He originally thought that this was just and became the first group of people that he would never be able to realize the king of lifetime. He expressed his situation changed and took practical actions. The prosperous great Ming dynasty favor of the king was divided into two. Then the king of Ming conferred the title of marquis, led 10,000 Miao soldiers, who had been waiting and knew that the opportunity had come. After winning every battle, the army grew stronger and stronger. Now, they had 80,000 soldiers and became a very important force in the king of Ming's faction. Some things, if you don't do it, you won't know. Maybe it was because he had been trapped in the Miao tribe for a long time. Miao Jinlong had always thought highly of the Ming dynasty. However, along the way, he did not meet any opponents. Often, when the army arrived, the city would fall by itself. Countless gold, silver, treasures, land, and beauties were at his fingertips. He finally saw what was called a real life, what was called a life of enjoyment. He also saw how the Ming dynasty, which was praised by others, could not withstand a single blow. After experiencing more, his horizons were broadened. Naturally, his heart grew bigger. Just as the king of Ming's main force was still consolidating and absorbing the fruits of victory, Miao Jinlong could no longer hold back. After asking for instructions, he led the 80,000 soldiers and started to sweep through the entire Guangdong. Attacking the Lianzhou prefecture was just the beginning. His goal was to enter Gaozhou, Laizhou, Guanghai guards, and the southwest of the Guangzhou prefecture from Lianzhou. He wanted to be the vanguard to cooperate with the king of Ming's main force to attack the Guangzhou prefecture. Lianzhou won the battle, and the Lianzhou general surrendered and opened the city. This seemed to be a good start. Miao Jinlong was overjoyed and led his troops to seize the city for a day. On the second day, he went straight to Gaozhou prefecture. In his eyes, Guang prefecture was the only place to rest. The other prefectures were just steps to wealth and power. It was because of this idea that when the troops arrived at the Gaozhou prefecture, he sent people as usual to persuade them to surrender. The people were sent out, but only corpses returned. Guanning was ordered to kill the messenger with an arrow. This is so infuriating. How dare you kill the messenger? Men, Surround the city, attack the city. When Miao Jinlong saw the messenger's corpse, he could not help but be furious. He immediately ordered to prepare to attack the city. My king, please calm down. Just as the other generals in the tent were enraged and were about to fight to be the vanguard, a voice rang out in the tent. Then, a man dressed in a long gown and dressed like a scholar walked out from the ranks. Mr. Zhou. Seeing the person who walked out, Miao Jinlong furrowed his brows. Then he relaxed and asked kindly, Mister, why are you stopping me from sending troops? It is for the good of my king. The man and called all Mr. Zhou said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. Mr. Zhou's original name was Zhou Da. He was originally from Yunnan. Because he once offended a steward of the Marquis sheeping house, he was stripped of his scholar status. In a fit of anger, he went to where the Miao people lived and married into their family, becoming the son-in-law of the Miao family. Because he was literate and knowledgeable, he was chosen by Miao Jinlong and kept by his side. Zhou Da was worthy of being called a scholar. He had contributed a lot to Miao Jinlong's plan along the way. Even when the Ming king sent people to contact them, he was the first to stand up and support them. Zhou Da not only focused on attacking, but also on attacking the heart. It was because of this that when he attacked the Lianzhou house, he did not lose a single soldier and obtained a city. All of this made Miao Jinlong admire him. In addition, this person had been in the Miao family for 10 years and even had a few children. There was no problem with his loyalty, and he was very trusted. When he saw that it was this person who stood out, he was not angry. Instead, he asked kindly, Let's hear it. Hearing that it was for his own good, Miao Jinlong asked with interest. Facing Miao Jinlong's amiable attitude and the angry expressions of the other generals, Zhou Da was neither servile nor overbearing. With a calm expression, he said, My king, generals, you must remember that our ally in Guangdong, Huang Yuliang, was completely wiped out, right? Of course. Miao Jinlong nodded his head. Due to his identity, he had never met young Master Huang or even his messenger. However, he knew that they had an ally in Guangdong. It was because of this ally that they were able to reduce the pressure on them in Yunnan, allowing them to achieve great things. Then, do you know why young Master Huang was defeated? Let me tell you, he was defeated by the Ming army in front of you. Zhou Da said with a very firm tone. The reason he knew this was mainly because he was good at gathering information. He was not like the ordinary Miao soldiers who only knew how to fight and fight. There was such a thing. Miao Jinlong, who was originally curious about what Zhou Da would say, could not help but change his expression when he heard this. He finally understood why Zhou Da did not agree to him attacking the city. So what if there is? Miao Jinlong did not speak, but it did not mean that his generals were afraid of anything. Among them, General Zhang Tsing said with a fearless tone, That only proves that young Master Huang is too weak. If it were our Miao soldiers, we would definitely make the southern Ming army cry for their parents on the battlefield and know how powerful we are. That's right, that's right. After the other generals heard Zhang Tsing's words, they all agreed. During this period of time, they had dealt with and fought with the southern Ming army. However, the facts proved that this was just an army that looked strong on the outside, but had ordinary combat strength. There was nothing to be afraid of. Huang Yuliang's defeat was definitely due to his own lack of strength. No, you are all wrong. Faced with the unanimous opinion of so many generals, Zhou Da refuted with the strength of a weak scholar. You all have only won a few battles, but you do not know that there is always someone stronger. Why don't you think about it? Since the Ming dynasty was able to conquer such a large country, how could they be weak? The reason why we aren't a match for them now is because our tempo is too fast. They weren't prepared, and weren't able to adapt. However, once they are given enough time to deploy their troops, who can guarantee that we will continue to win? Not to mention, the ones who defeated young Master Huang weren't the Southern Ming Empire's army, but the most mysterious mercenaries that they spent a large sum of money to hire. Zhou did indeed understand a lot. This was also related to the education he received. It was precisely because he had read more books that he naturally had more knowledge and had more considerations. For example, studying the opponent was something that must be done. Mercenary army? When the generals heard this new name for the first time, they all looked at each other with a puzzled expression. Zhou did not expect them to understand anything. He only needed to tell them what he knew. As for what to do next, whether or not they had to continue attacking the city, it was not something that he could decide. Yes, it is the mercenary army. It was this army that once saved the life of the Southern Ming Emperor, Yingzong's life on the battlefield. It was also this army that defeated the Walla cavalry that wanted to enter the capital of Baiming. It was also this army that defeated young Master Huang, who was very influential in Guangdong. These are their achievements after they made their debut. He spoke truthfully about everything that he knew. Then Zhou continued, "If we want to attack the city, we will definitely not be able to avoid them. How much confidence do we have? As for where to go, I ask my king and the generals to discuss this." Chapter 4:30. Zhou shut his mouth and did not want to argue with anyone about this matter. He was originally a Han Chinese, but because he was treated unfairly and could not survive, he came to the Miao tribe and became the son-in-law of the Miao tribe. A person like him actually had a very low social status. He couldn't even be considered the head of a family. How many people would think highly of him? If Miao Jinlong did not see that he did have some ability and put him in an important position, he would not be qualified to enter the tent for discussion, let alone argue with others. Zhou shut his mouth, which made the others unable to find an object to argue with for a while. They all looked at King Miao Jinlong. The Miao tribe also had a very strict hierarchy, especially when it came to major matters such as the deployment of troops on the battlefield. The king's order was the final order. Everyone's eyes were on him, which made Miao Jinlong silent. Although it seemed that the journey was very smooth, and the army was also growing step by step. From the original 10,000 people to the current 80,000 people, it was a strong army. However, no one knew better than Miao Jinlong about his own strength. The so-called expansion of the army was just these soldiers who were forced to join. Most of them joined the army to fill their stomachs, unlike the Miao family that he led in the beginning. They were born to conquer the world and be proud of the heroes. They did not even have a goal. Such an army could only fight a smooth battle. Once they encountered a tough opponent, they were likely to be heavily injured or even defeated. It was possible that they could lose their lives. The great Ming dynasty could occupy the world until now. If it was said that they did not have a capable army, even Miao Jinlong himself would not believe it. Just like now, didn't they encounter one? A head-on clash was far from what he wanted to see. Where there were people, there would be underworld. This saying was also applicable in the army. For any organization, no matter what the intention was, as long as time passed, factions would appear. It was something that could not be stopped, unless the system was very strict. If there was a great soul leading the army, these problems could be suppressed. Just like the King of Min's faction now. Everyone treated the King of Min as the core, but it was undeniable that which general did not have their own thoughts. If you want to be respected by others, if you want to share the benefits, the prerequisite is to have enough strength. Only then will others respect you, value you, and not neglect you. How to expand their own strength while winning the battle? or at least to preserve their own strength, became the most important thing in the eyes of the kings. If everything was as Zoda said, and the Ming army in front of them and the mercenaries in front of them were very powerful, then choosing such a tough opponent was originally an unwise thing. What was the meaning of winning if they used up all their forces and severely injure the enemy? It was just making a wedding dress for others. It was because of this desire to preserve their strength that Miao Jinlong listened to Zoda's words. He then said to the generals looking at him, "Forget it. Since the Ming army in front of us is not so easy to deal with, we do not need to make too many sacrifices. We will just surround them and wait for their morale to drop and surrender. How about this? We will first move out of Laizhou Prefecture and take the nearby cities. General Zhang Zeng, listen up. I will give you 10,000 troops. Go around Gaozhou Prefecture and take Laizhou City. Remember, if the Ming army does not take the initiative to stop you, do not casually provoke them. Think about the big picture. Understand?" Miao Jinlong finally gave the order. He listened to Zoda's suggestion and did not take a head-on approach. Instead, he only surrounded the city and lowered the enemy's morale first. Then, he would have the opportunity to take Gaozhou Prefecture without bloodshed and complete his strategic mission. After the king gave the order, General Zhang Xing stepped out to receive it. Not long after, the 10,000 Miao family soldiers rushed out of the camp and went around the border of Gaozhou Prefecture, heading straight for Laizhou Prefecture in the south. After the Miao army arrived, they did not immediately attack the city. Instead, they acted as if they were going to surround the city. This caused General Yu Guang, who had already prepared to defend Gaozhou City, to be puzzled. However, he soon found out from General Wei that it was probably because the enemy was afraid of the mercenaries. Yu Guang was still thinking about how powerful the mercenaries were. Just their name alone was enough to scare people into not daring to make a move. The Miao army actually started to move again. They went straight from Gaozhou Prefecture to the mercenaries' Camp 5, Li South. Don't tell me they want to attack the mercenaries first, but it seems like they only have 10,000 troops. Is that even useful? The deputy general beside Yu Guang voiced out his doubts while revealing an expression of disbelief. "Idiot! They are probably going to attack Laizhou Prefecture." Yu Guang glared at the deputy general beside him with an expression that said, "You are really stupid." Then he quickly sent someone to report this news to the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was waiting in the government office. 5 li south of Gaozhou Prefecture, the mercenaries' camp. When the scouts noticed that the Miao army was moving towards their camp, they quickly reported it. Tiger's Mane did not dare to delay after hearing the news. Chapter 4:31. Hearing Tiger's Mane's puzzled question, Yang Chendong nodded and said, "Yes, we know that Laizhou Prefecture is an empty city, but others don't know that. What will they do when they find out that there is no one there?" Tiger's Mane was originally listening to Yang Chendong's words, but when there was suddenly no more, he asked in confusion, "What do we do?" "Yes, what do we do? This young master is asking you a question." Yang Chendong nodded and looked at Tiger's Mane seriously. Tiger's Mane saw that Yang Chendong was testing him, so he quickly racked his brains. However, perhaps because of the suddenness of the situation, or perhaps because of his nervousness, he couldn't come up with a reason. He could only stammer, "Young master, Tiger's Mane is slow-witted. He doesn't know what will happen next." Sigh. A long sigh with disappointment in his eyes. Tiger's Mane was good at everything, but he was used to relying on himself. How could he be entrusted with important tasks in the future? The good thing was that he liked Tiger's loyalty and complete obedience to orders. As for his shortcomings, he would become stronger with more practice. "All right, then young master will tell you. When I looked at the Miao army just now, They were very arrogant, as if they didn't put us or any other army in their eyes. Usually, such an army's morale is very high, and they won't be too weak in battle. However, they often have a fatal flaw, and that is arrogance. On the battlefield, if they are too arrogant and don't put their opponents in their eyes, the consequences will be very serious, and they may even lose their lives. Yang Chendong's voice was still echoing in the air. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, Luo Pe, and the other regiment and battalion officers all had a thoughtful expression on their faces. They also seemed to be wondering if their own army was too arrogant. Would they also make the mistake of underestimating the enemy? Seeing that everyone was deep in thought, Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a satisfied expression. It was almost impossible for an army to remain undefeated for its entire life. There were too many factors involved, such as morale, willpower, advanced weapons, whether the commanding general gave the correct orders, whether the soldiers were united, whether they were brave, whether they dared to risk their lives on the battlefield, and even factors such as the right time, location, people, whether they had a good reason for their actions, whether they were righteous, whether the army had a soul, whether the soldiers had faith, whether the soldiers were of the same mind, and so on and so forth. It could be said that victory in this war was not determined by who had more people or whose weapons were more advanced. It was just like during the war's war, of course. Our armies is Maine, is Maine, is Maine, Maine, was Maine, Maine, was Maine, Maine, was Maine's Maine. This was as Maine, 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 was Maine, 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 Maine. The cold front had too many advantages. For example, their advanced weapons, strict training, strict military laws, and uniform thinking and behavior among the soldiers. However, this did not mean that every battle could be won. Changes were ever present. How to deal with and resolve these sudden changes was also the key to victory. Beating them down was even more necessary. A person could have a lofty and unyielding character, but he couldn't have an arrogant heart. Otherwise, he would fall sooner or later. It was just a matter of time. Using today's opportunity, Yang Chendong was knocking on the heads of the various regimental and battalion level officers. Seeing that everyone was deep in thought and understood his intentions, he continued, "A proud army will never return empty-handed." However, an operation without a goal or plan was often the cause of failure. Take this 10,000 Miao army. For example, if they return empty-handed after going to Laizhou Prefecture and reunite with the Miao army's main force, then even if they fail, they will not be at fault. On the other hand, if their arrogance is at play and they want to take something back to deal with us, then their calculations will be wrong and the consequences will be very serious. Young master, are you saying that when the Miao army returns empty-handed, they will attack us? But isn't that a little too bold? Tiger's Mane finally understood the meaning behind Yang Chendong's words and asked with a face of disbelief. These words came from Yang Chendong's mouth. If it was anyone else, Tiger's Mane would not have believed it, and would even say that the other party was just trying to scare them. Are you brave? Ever since they left Yunnan, they have not met any opponents. How can such an army not be proud? What's so strange about them making some bold moves? Yang Chendong said all of this confidently. He only needed to confirm that the 10,000 Miao army would definitely attack them. Since Yang Chendong had said so, Tiger's Mane immediately said excitedly, "Young master, then let's prepare properly and teach them a lesson when they come." Yes, preparation is a must. However, there's no need to be too nervous. Didn't Gao Xiong bring some newly developed mines from the munitions factory when he came? Bury some of them. If they dare to come, let them know what it means to scatter flowers from heaven. Yang Chendong was not completely sure that the 10,000 Miao army would attack them. Before he had any definite information, there was no need to make the soldiers so nervous. All he needed to do was to bury the mines and prepare for defense. If they really came, the effect would be surprisingly good. When the Lung Feng army attacked together, the 10,000 Miao army would basically be useless. Yes, Yang Qindong's words were equivalent to an order. According to his thoughts and the analysis of some of the court officials, Min Min had already taken over Min Min. The king of Min had just obtained most of the territories in Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong. It was time to stop and digest them. At least in the short term, there should not be any military action. However, it seemed that they had underestimated the enemy's appetite and ambition. In the court, when the officials heard the news, they all panicked, especially the newly appointed left assistant minister, Chen Ruyan. He was so nervous that he was sweating profusely. Kuang Yi was not in court. The former left assistant minister Wang Ji had misjudged the situation and had been arrested and interrogated. However, because he was still in Shiping Manor in Yunnan, and because the road back was full of King of Min's rebel army, he was not immediately taken back to Jingdo for interrogation. With the loss of two important figures, Chen Ruyan was promoted to the position of left assistant minister and also to manage the affairs of the Ministry of War. Normally, Chen Ruyan would be overjoyed to receive such a position. However, in such a dangerous situation, taking over the Ministry of War was like taking over a mess. How could he not be frustrated? Luckily, Chen Ruyan was quite capable. In fact, in history, he had once held the position of Minister of War. Even if the situation was a little dangerous, with his strong ability, he had come up with some good countermeasures. For example, when the entire southern Ming dynasty started to recruit soldiers, any male between 16 and 40 years old could sign up. The requirement was that each family had to send one person. If there were more, and they were willing to join the army, one person could pay a year's worth of taxes. Once the world was peaceful, these people would not be recorded in the army and could regain their freedom. They could choose to do farming or business. Chapter 432. Chen Ruyan's policy was very good, and it attracted a large number of people to join the army. Statistics showed that the newly recruited soldiers in the southern Ming Empire had reached 1 million. This was because the financial pressure of the Ministry of Revenue was too great. Otherwise, it would not be difficult to double this number. This was the benefit of having a strong foundation. It had to be said that the great Ming Empire was still very powerful. If it was not for the appearance of Yang Qindong, it would be like history. It would not be a big problem to continue for a few hundred years. The actions of the Ministry of Military Personnel were seen by Zhu Qizhen of Yingzhong, and he praised them twice. Now, they only needed to wait for the training of these recruits to be completed before they could enter the battlefield. With so many fresh troops, it would not be a problem to wipe out the King of Min's rebel army. But at this time, the King of Min's faction, who was estimated to be biding their time, made a move. If they could not be effectively controlled, it would not take long for them to reach out for a yard after getting an inch. The other rebel army would follow suit. It was afraid that before the training of the recruits was completed, the King of Min's faction would kill their way to the front of Nanjing Prefecture. The southern Ming Empire's regime might face the danger of ending, with the danger of the country being destroyed. How could Zhu Qizhen not be anxious? With a trace of blood in his eyes, he looked at the officials in the court. Dear officials, is there any way to control the situation? It doesn't need too long. It can last for a year. No, 9 months is enough. Zhu Qizhen asked anxiously, but what he got was silence. These officials could usually speak some reason, or even twisted reason, when they encounter problems. In the face of military affairs, the officials now had a very good interpretation of what it meant to be a scholar meeting a soldier. In the face of the King of Min's faction, who did not talk reason at all, It seemed that any method was useless. Just like 2 days ago, the Minister of Rights, Lu Da, had proposed that they should first negotiate with the King of Min. Of course, this kind of negotiation was fake. The real thing was to stabilize the situation and delay time. Although this policy made Zhu Qizhen somewhat unhappy, considering that it could maintain the situation, and buy more time to prepare, he gritted his teeth and agreed. But who would have thought that when Lu Da solemnly arranged for someone to do this, the envoy sent out a firm refusal before he even arrived in front of Prince of Min? Under such favorable circumstances, with the cooperation of Jiaoji and Miao Jun, only a fool would agree to sit down and negotiate with the Southern Ming Empire. The standard of negotiation was that everyone's strength was equal and no one could do anything to the other. Only then could such a method be used. When one party's power was too great, it would be difficult to negotiate. It was precisely because the method had already been tried that all of the officials shut their mouths, looking as if they were unable to come up with a solution. In fact, it wasn't that there was no way. At least, there were two paths in front of Zhu Qizhen. First, they had to take the initiative to submit to Ming, and then cede a few provinces in a peaceful situation. This way, they would be able to obtain the help of Zhu Qiyu, the acting head of Ming. Then he could borrow troops to destroy the king of Min's faction. Second, they had to agree to Kuang Ye's condition of giving Yang Qindong the throne. This way, as long as the mercenaries were willing to help, even if they couldn't immediately suppress the king of Min's rebellion, they could buy enough time. After the training of the new recruits was completed, the Southern Ming Empire would be at peace. However, Zhu Qizhen didn't want to choose the first of these two paths. His cousin had seized the throne, while the other party was in a precarious position. This had already made him very unhappy. If Yang Shan had not suddenly disobeyed him and disappeared, he would not have acknowledged the fact that the other party was Emperor Ming even now. If he lowered his head now, wouldn't it prove that he was inferior to the other party? If that was the case, people who didn't know the situation would think that the other party was the legitimate one. This was definitely not what Zhu Qizhen wanted to see. Even now, he still wanted to kill his way to the Southern Ming Empire and unify the Great Ming Empire. Wouldn't this be his own goal and hope? As for the second point, Zhu Qizhen also didn't want to give Yang Qindong the title of king with a different surname. Yang Qindong was really too outstanding. He was so outstanding that Zhu Qizhen was very afraid of him. If taking the first path was to end one's own future goal, then choosing the second path was to end one's own grave. Yang Qindong was only 21 years old, and he was already given the title of king with a different surname. If he still needed him in the future, how would he reward him? Could it be that he had to give up the throne? Moreover, once he was given the title of king with a different surname, it would easily create a situation where he couldn't get rid of his subordinates. If he wanted to solve this problem in the future, he didn't know how much he would have to pay. As for what the genie guards said about Yang Qindong's poor health and being poisoned, Zhu Qizhen didn't dare to fully believe it. Yang Qindong had given him too many surprises, so it was reasonable that he couldn't fully believe it. This led to the gathering of the ministers, wanting to see if any of them could come up with a better idea. But now, Zhu Qizhen was somewhat disappointed. Incompetent. He cursed in his heart. Zhu Qizhen had to choose the lesser of two evils. It was time for him to make a decision. In the end, his heart was biased toward the second choice. Forget it. End the court. The 6 ministers and the imperial censor stay behind to discuss matters in the side hall. Zhu Qizhen called the several important officials to the side hall. Naturally, there was only one matter, and that was to discuss the matter of giving Yang Qindong the title of king. Since no one could think of a better idea, they could only consider this matter. Fortunately, Mu Bin had been given the title of king with a different surname before. This wasn't the first time he had done such a thing. In other words, It wasn't the first time he had lost face. So what if it happened again? Those who could become important officials were all quick-witted and good at reading people's expressions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to keep their positions. When Zhu Qizhen summoned them, they all guessed the emperor's intention. So when they entered the side hall, they all lowered their heads and didn't speak. Obviously, no one wanted to mention this matter first to avoid tarnishing their reputation. Cough. Sitting on the golden dragon throne, Zhu Qizhen's expression was a bit ugly. Seeing that no one spoke, he coughed lightly to attract everyone's attention. But in the eyes of the ministers who had weathered countless storms, this was completely useless. Even the left assistant minister of the Bureau of Military Personnel, Chun Ruyan, who represented Kuang Yi, lowered his head in silence. It was as if there was a beautiful scenery under his feet. He couldn't move his eyes or raise them at all. Seeing everyone's reaction, Zhu Qizhen was displeased. Although he knew that whoever spoke of this matter would be looked down upon in the history books, someone had to do it. Could it be that he, the emperor, had to do it himself? Did he think that what he did in the history books wasn't shameful enough? The emperor was the emperor. Since the officials didn't take the initiative to speak, he would call them out one by one. He thought, "You forced me to do this." When Zhu Qizhen spoke, the first person he called out was the Minister of History, Chun Sun. "Beloved official Chun, as the Minister of Personnel, you should have a reputation for discerning people. Is there any way to resolve the current situation?" Since ancient times, the Ministry of Personnel had a saying that officials were one level higher than officials. As the Minister of Personnel, who was in charge of the promotion, evaluation, and recommendation of officials, he was often described as the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel. Usually, as long as he had enough experience, he would be the leader of the officials. Immediately calling out Chun Sun's name showed that he didn't have any intention of picking on the weak. He was really forcing everyone to state their position. Especially when he said that he had a reputation for discerning people, Chun Sun couldn't refuse. This also made Minister Chen, who was standing there, suffer. Although Zhu Qizhen's words were gentle, if one carefully thought about the meaning behind them, as long as one wasn't a fool, one could sense the threat. Perhaps Zhu Qizhen was giving the officials a choice. Either they said what he wanted to say, or they could only accept some infamy, or they could take it head on and be prepared to lose their position. One was fame, and the other was benefits. They had to choose one. They couldn't take all the benefits. Chun Sun's expression was very ugly. He was in a complicated struggle, considering what to do, what to say. What kind of gains and losses would there be? "Your Majesty, this official has something to say." Just as Chun Sun was thinking about how to respond to the emperor, the Minister of Rites, Lu De, finally spoke. He held his ceremonial tablet and took a step forward. Originally, Zhu Qizhen was about to get angry and give Chun Sun a good beating. He might even find a reason to remove him from his position. However, Lu De suddenly stood up. This made Zhu Qizhen happy. Thinking that he still had loyal officials by his side, he did his best to make his expression as good as possible. "Beloved official Lu, what do you have to say?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Lu De nodded and lowered his cupped hands. Then, with a calm gaze, he said, "Your Majesty, the situation in the southwest is chaotic. It's about to spread. Our army still needs some time to train. As the saying goes, distant water can't quench a present thirst. In this official's opinion, it's better to appoint a king with a different surname and have him lead the army in battle to protect the great Ming's future." Not only did Lu De stand up, but he also took the initiative to talk about the appointment of a king. This made Zhu Qizhen very happy. "Beloved official Lu's words are very much to our liking. Many thanks, Your Majesty." After Lu De received the praise, he quickly put on a humble appearance. Then he continued, It's just that the appointment of a king is a big matter. In this official's opinion, we must not be rash, especially the Duke of Loyalty. He once served Bai Ming Daizong. Now, his family is also there. For such a big matter, we must first discuss it with them. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we won't be recognized by everyone in the world, and it will be easier for trouble to arise. Hearing Lu De's sudden new question, Zhu Qizhen nodded thoughtfully and said, "Beloved official Lu's words are very reasonable. Then, in your opinion, what should be the explanation?" "Your Majesty, we should first send someone to discuss this matter with Daizong. As long as both sides reach a consensus, the appointment of a king with a different surname can be carried out, and the people of the world won't talk about it. Therefore, this official is willing to ask your Majesty to give the Ministry of Rights some time. This official will immediately send someone to do it. As for the Duke of Loyalty, we can first notify him to lead the army to retreat. After he resolves the rebellion, presumably the matter of the appointment of a king will be settled. It'll be a good time to confer the title. This way, both sides won't be delayed." Chapter 433. It was as if Lu De had already thought of a countermeasure. As he spoke without hesitation. When the conditions were right, success would come naturally. That's true. Zhu Qizhen nodded after Lu De's explanation. However, a few more questions popped up. He couldn't help but ask, if that's the case, will the Duke of Zhongdan be willing? Also, how confident are you in convincing Bai Ming? In Zhu Qizhen's opinion, they couldn't truly be bestowed the title of king. What if Yang Qindong didn't agree? Also, the southern Ming Empire had no choice but to be bestowed the title of king. Bai Ming wouldn't suffer any losses. Would they be willing to admit it? At the very least, if it was him, he probably wouldn't agree. For example, Yang Qindong was the Duke of Zhongdan. Even now, Bai Ming's officials still referred to him as the Duke of Zhongdan. Since Lu De had stood up and made such a suggestion, it was natural that he had thought about these problems long ago. When he heard Zhu Qizhen's question, he smiled and said, "Your Majesty, there's no need to worry, since Your Majesty has already bestowed the title. If the Duke of Zhongdan isn't satisfied once the news spreads, I'm afraid everyone will rise up and criticize him. Sometimes spittle can drown people. I'm sure the Duke of Zhongdan knows this very well. As for whether Bai Ming will agree or not, Your Majesty, that's not a problem we need to consider. If they don't agree, you can tell the Duke of Zhongdan and let him deal with it. In short, Your Majesty is wise." Lu De didn't say what if. However, Zhu Qizhen already understood. If Bai Ming didn't approve of the title of king, Yang Qindong would definitely be very angry. This was a good opportunity to drive a wedge between them. If things didn't go well, it was possible for both sides to fight. At that time, he would really be able to reap the benefits. Thinking that if Yang Qindong and Bai Ming were to fight to the death, it would be a chance for the South Ming Empire to rise again. Immediately, his face lit up with joy as he said, "Beloved official Lu is indeed worthy of being this subject's backbone. Good. Everything will be done according to your wishes. Chao Jixiang, draft a decree for me." Originally, he was still having a headache over the fact that he had to confer another king with a different surname. This was equivalent to selling the country of his ancestors. Even if one day he became strong again and took everything back, who knew how the history books would record this matter, and whether the future generations would scold him? But after hearing Lu De's words, the bad thing became a good thing. He didn't need to pay any price to solve the problem. He even made a strong enemy for Bai Ming. Such a brilliant plan made him very satisfied. Now that Zhu Qizhen was satisfied, the ministers were free to leave. In other words, among the 6 ministers, other than Minister Kwang Yi of the Ministry of War and Minister Wang Zuo of the Ministry of Revenue, the other 4 ministers had already formed a group. Coincidentally, these 4 ministers did not have any close relationship with Yang Chendong. On the contrary, because of Luda, there was some estrangement between them. Everyone saw what happened just now. Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan saw how Luda spoke up to save Chen Sun at the crucial moment. They admired Luda for being fearless and not caring about his reputation. Now, they walked over to express their goodwill. Luda naturally noticed the approach of these 2 people and immediately had a plan in mind. He chuckled and said, "Brother Chen, what are you talking about? We are originally one. It can be said that when one person's glory, everyone's glory. When one person's loss, everyone's loss. This is what I should do." "Good, well said." Xiao Chua and Jiang Yuan could not help but nod to express their appreciation. Because of this, the friendship between the 4 of them seemed to have become even closer. It was obvious that with them around, Yang Chendong's wish to be conferred the title of king would be very difficult. The mercenary camp outside Gaozhou Prefecture City. It had been 5 days since Miao Jun passed through here. At noon on this day, the scouts from Lungfeng reported that the 10,000 Miao soldiers had returned. They would most likely pass by Lungfeng's camp in the evening. When the news spread, many people in Lungfeng's camp were eager to show off their skills. Now, they only hoped that Miao Jun would impulsively attack the mercenaries and give them a chance to show off. Just as Yang Chendong expected, General Zhang Tseng, who led the team on the way back, had been considering whether to attack the mercenaries or not. Originally, they had vowed to attack Laizhou Prefecture City, wanting to break through and achieve great merit. However, he never thought that when he really went there, he would see an empty city. Not only that, they did not see anything valuable in the city. This meant that they had returned without achieving anything. This made Zhang Tseng, who had finally managed to get this job, feel depressed. Since the day of Miao Jun's uprising, he had been sweeping away everything in his path as if he had entered a no-man's land. Whenever he encountered an enemy, it was like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. When had there ever been a time like this where he had mobilized so many people, yet there was not even the slightest bit of gain? If they went back like this, they would probably be laughed at by their colleagues. "No, we definitely cannot go back like this," Zhang Tseng said in his heart. However, if he wanted to return with great merit, it seemed that he could only choose to attack the mercenaries. Humph, Scholar Zhou's words cannot be completely trusted. He is originally a Han Chinese, a citizen of the great Ming dynasty. Who knows what he is thinking? Before he decided to take action, Zhang Tseng convinced himself in his heart. Then, he sent out scouts to check on the situation of the mercenary camp with the excuse of going back to report the news. Zhang Tseng was quite careful. At least he knew to observe the situation before taking action. Thus, the scouts he sent out openly passed by the mercenaries' camp and headed towards the Miao Army's main camp in Gaozhou Prefecture City. Originally, the defense of Lungfeng's camp had always been very strict. Usually, one could see squads of soldiers patrolling back and forth. However, ever since they used the night to plant mines outside the camp, they naturally relaxed a lot. This time, in order to lure the enemy to attack, they purposely relaxed on the outside but tightened on the inside. Wherever outsiders could see, the soldiers would appear very lazy. However, in the depths of the camp where no one could see, the training was still very strict. In this way, the Miao Army scouts who seemed to be passing by, but were actually investigating the situation, fell for the trap and reported the mercenaries' performance to Zhang Tseng. Hearing that the mercenaries were so careless, Zhang Tseng was overjoyed. He felt that this was a great opportunity given to him by the heavens. He immediately sent his trusted aide to the Miao army's main camp and reported that he wanted to take advantage of the situation to attack the mercenaries. He also listed out his reason, which was that the mercenaries were too careless, and this was the perfect time to take them down. The trusted aide quickly passed by the mercenaries' camp again. After observing for a while and confirming that the scout's report was correct, he went to the Miao army's main camp and met with King Miao Jinlong. He then told him of his general's plan. Attack the mercenaries' camp? Hearing the report, Miao Jinlong, who was originally sitting at the head of the table, was suddenly energized. However, when he repeated this sentence, he did not forget to look at Scholar Zhou, the most cultured person in the camp. Zhou was originally listening attentively. It must be said that he was indeed smart. When he heard the scout report that General Zhang Tsung had led the troops to Laizhou Prefecture without any success, he had already predicted that the journey back would not be peaceful. Now that he heard the trusted aide that Zhang Tsung sent back say this, he sighed in his heart. Zhou would not believe what the scout said about the mercenaries' camp being lax and the soldiers slacking off without any morale. Chapter 434. Since they were able to wipe out the Huang bandit army, which was a huge headache for the southern Ming Empire, how could such an army be as weak as described? If that was the case, it could only prove that the other party had ulterior motives. Or rather, they were just putting on an act and waiting for others to attack. Although Zhou had these thoughts in his mind, he did not intend to argue. The strength of the mercenary army was not something that he could rely on. Perhaps it was only when he was rebuffed and suffered losses that others would believe his words. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Therefore, when Miao Jinlong looked at him, he did not object firmly and only expressed his opinion. My king, the mercenary army should not be as weak as they appear to be. I'm afraid there's a trap. A trap? The news said that they only have 7,000 people. General Zhang Tsung's army has 10,000 people. Including us, we have 80,000 people. So what if there's a trap? Miao Jinlong saw that Zhou's attitude was still calm and tried to persuade him. Zhou only expressed his opinion and said what he thought. Since others did not believe him, there was nothing he could do. He did not say anything and looked as though he would not change his opinion. Therefore, when faced with Miao Jinlong's second question, he did not say anything. Since even Zhou did not say anything, Miao Jinlong felt that his idea of sneaking into the camp was a good one. After all, if they could take down the mercenary army in one battle, Gaozhou Prefecture would be broken through. He would have made a great contribution along the way and would be able to reach the Guangzhou Prefecture. From there, he would be able to control and occupy the entire Guangdong Prefecture. With an idea in mind, and no one standing out to object, Miao Jinlong immediately waved his hand and said to the personal guard sent by Zhangzeng, "Tell your general to choose to attack the mercenaries tonight. This king will send troops to support you. At the same time, I will also send troops to keep an eye on Gaozhou Prefecture, so that they won't be able to come out to help." Yang Chendong was still chatting with First Madam Hu Yen and Third Madam Snow Lady in the tent. To him, chatting with his wives was the best way to relax. Report. Tiger's Mane's voice came from outside the tent. Come in. Yang Chendong straightened his body. He knew that something must have happened. Otherwise, Tiger's Mane wouldn't have come to disturb him at this time. Yang Chendong's guess was right. Tiger's Mane had indeed come to inform him of the changes in Miao Jun's troops. Young master, the 10,000 Miao soldiers who were returning to their camp have suddenly slowed down their speed. I've asked someone to calculate it. Based on their current speed, it's very likely that they'll reach our camp after midnight. Slow down? Yang Chendong couldn't help but chuckle when he heard this sudden change that could also be said to be a logical change. That day, Yang Qindong saw the Miao army walk past his camp in an extremely arrogant manner. He thought that this army was too proud and arrogant, and it was very likely that there would be people who were not content and would be like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Thus, he ordered the scouts to keep a close eye on them. At the same time, the camp was prepared to take precautions. However, all of this was just a guess, a feeling, or an inference based on experience. It couldn't be considered as the truth. However, with this information from Tiger's Mane, it was completely different. As everyone knew, once an army that had left the camp was on the way back, the soldiers would be anxious to return home. Their speed would only be faster and not slower. Just like these 10,000 Miao soldiers, their desire to return to their camp should be very strong. Thus, their speed should be very fast, not to mention that they should have reached their camp before dinner. Even if they were a little later, their speed should have been faster. How could they suddenly be pushed back and only arrive at his camp in the middle of the night? If that was really the case, wouldn't it be better for them to have a good night's rest and return to camp early the next morning? Just from this point alone, it was obvious that the other party's intentions were clear. How's the Miao army's camp? Yang Qindong asked out of caution. Reporting to young master, the scouts monitoring there reported that nothing unexpected happened. Everything seems to be normal. Tiger's Mane replied truthfully, everything is normal. Humph, that's the most abnormal thing. Think about it. If the army is really returning to camp, wouldn't the camp need to make some preparations? Seeing that the enemy is near, it's very reasonable for them to send out troops to welcome them. However, they didn't do anything, which exposed their intentions. Yang Qindong gave a very certain answer after analyzing the situation. Originally, Tiger's Mane didn't understand why normal was abnormal. However, after listening to Yang Qindong's analysis, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Young Master was indeed the young master. He had talked about this before in the strategy class, but why didn't he think of this immediately? Well, if that's the case, the Miao army will definitely come tonight if nothing unexpected happens. They won't come late at night, but a little earlier. Humph! Since that's the case, we'll just prepare our pockets and wait for them to come. There's no reason for us not to eat this fat meat that's already in our mouth. Yang Qindong had a confident smile on his face. Seeing this scene, Hu Yan and Madame Shui's eyes twinkled like stars. Which girl didn't love heroes? Not to mention people like Yang Qindong, who had such a family business at such a young age. Chapter 435. Gaozhou Prefecture. Kuang Yi, Guanning, Ma Wei, and Yu Guang were standing below the tall city gate tower, looking into the distance. Is the news accurate? The Miao army really slowed down? Kuang Yi stood in the middle of the crowd and said solemnly, the Miao army was already at the city gates, but they didn't attack immediately. Instead, they circled around the city and made a trip to Laizhou Prefecture. This way, it seemed like Gaozhou Prefecture was temporarily safe, but Kuang Yi was very clear that the Miao army didn't find trouble with them because they were afraid of the mercenaries below the city gates. It should be because Yang Qindong's reputation as the god of war had spread, which made the other party wary. They didn't act rashly because they wanted to play it safe. As a result, Kuang Yi couldn't help but sigh. There were indeed smart people everywhere. Originally, he was still hoping that Miao Jun would take the initiative to provoke the mercenaries and then lead to a battle to the death. This way, he wouldn't have to spend so much effort to ask Yang Qindong to send troops. His hopes were dashed, and Kuang Yi could only wait for news from the imperial court. It could be said that, at the beginning, Kuang Yi was shocked when he heard that Yang Qindong was also interested in being conferred the title of king. He even thought that this request was too high and impossible to fulfill. However, as the days passed, his thoughts changed. Shiping King Mu Bin could be conferred the title of king. So why couldn't Yang Qindong? Speaking of contributions, just based on the fact that Yang Qindong had saved Ing Zong's life on the battlefield, no one could compare to him. It was just a pity that the emperor's heavenly might was unpredictable. Perhaps he was used to being high and mighty, thinking that everyone should do anything for him. On the contrary, it made them slowly forget what gratitude was and what it meant to repay kindness. Regardless, after Kuang Yi calmed down, he thought that Yang Qindong could still be conferred the title of king, not for any other reason, but because the southern Ming Empire had no other choice. Since this was the case, why not confer the title of king to someone with a different surname to solve the crisis in front of them? Not to mention that Yang Qindong's health seemed to be very poor. If that was the case, then it was not a big deal to crown a half-dead person as king. The obstacles should be much smaller. Just like that, she waited for the emperor's imperial edict before going to Yang Qindong to talk. Unexpectedly, a scout came to report that the 10,000 Miao soldiers who went to the Laizhou prefecture had returned. Not only that, but they slowed down as they approached. Who was Kuang Yi? To be able to become the Minister of War. Even if he did not participate in the war during peacetime and had never been on the battlefield, he should at least be someone who knew how to fight. Miao Jun's abnormal actions quickly attracted his attention. He immediately called for Guan Ying, Ma Wei, Yu Guang, and the other generals. After a short discussion, they came to the conclusion that Miao Jun would most likely make a move tonight. Yes, master, we have already investigated, and it is indeed so. They must have their own motives for doing this, but we cannot confirm if they want to make a move against the mercenaries or us. Guan Ying stood up and reported the results of his investigation with Ma Wei and Yu Guang. There is no need to confirm. They must be making a move against the mercenaries. Kuang Yi was very confident. They were in the city, and attacking the city at night would be much more difficult than attacking in the day. Of course, he would also take some precautions. For example, if there were spies in the city, it was not impossible to open the city gates at night and lure the enemy into the city. How about this? The 3 generals will work hard tonight. Keep a close eye on the 4 cities and tell the soldiers below that without this old man's orders, even the 3 of you have no authority to open the city gates. Kuang Ye's voice was firm and powerful. Only by taking the authority into his own hands could he ensure that the city gates were not lost. As for whether his actions and suspicions would disappoint his subordinates, he couldn't care less at this critical time. Fortunately, it was only for one night. In addition, he was the Minister of War and the current Grand Tutor of the Crown Prince. His official rank was much higher than these people, so he still had some authority. As expected, when Kuang Yi said this, Guan Ying was slightly better, but Ma Wei and Yu Guang's expressions were somewhat unnatural. However, once they considered Kuang Ye's identity, even if the 2 of them were to have their authority taken away, they could only pinch their noses and nod in agreement. Master, since you can see that these Miao soldiers want to make a move against the mercenaries, shouldn't you send someone to remind the Duke of loyalty? Although they did not agree to send troops to deal with the bandits, they are still our allies. Guan Ying saw Kuang Ye's affirmation and thought about whether he should take the opportunity to express goodwill. Yes, I can send someone there to inform them. However, this old man thinks that the Duke of Loyalty has already seen through it. If he doesn't even have this little ability, how could the Huang bandits be destroyed so quickly? When Kuang Yi said this, his originally serious old face had a slight smile. However, he only wanted to send someone to inform Yang Qindong. As for sending reinforcements, it was better to forget about it. After all, he did not have much military strength in his hands. Moreover, the situation was unclear. If they opened the city gates in the middle of the night, who knew what kind of accident would happen. The sun had already set, and the sky was beginning to turn dark. At this time, the people on both sides seemed to be waiting for the sky to turn darker, so that they could fulfill some people's desire to kill in the dark and windy night. Sure, it was equivalent to 8 o'clock in the evening. The Miao army that was originally moving slowly began to speed up. With the sudden increase in speed, they could reach the mercenaries' barracks in half an hour and sneak into the camp. In other words, the time they decided to attack was Haishur, which was between 9 o'clock in the evening and 11 o'clock in the evening. This period of time was not the best time to sneak into the camp. This was because most people were not asleep, or those who were asleep were not in a deep sleep. Once something happened, they would be able to react immediately. However, after Zhang Tseng knew about this, he still did the opposite. This was where he thought he was smart. First, he slowed down the marching speed to make people think that it was late at night when they arrived at the mercenaries' barracks. This way, they would make a wrong judgment. In order to ensure that they had enough energy at that time, if he was the leader, Zhang Tseng would arrange for the soldiers to sleep early and wake up before midnight. Considering that he would definitely do this, Zhang Tseng sent someone to observe the meal time of the mercenaries' barracks. As expected, the rising of the fireworks was earlier than usual. This was the signal to eat and sleep early. With this, Zhang Tseng was full of confidence. The plan was for you to prepare to set up defenses in the middle of the night. I won't go against your wishes and attack early. This way, I can make use of the time difference. Thus, the sudden acceleration of the march at Haishur. Miao Jun, who had long been prepared and had even eaten in advance, began to move, running forward at an extremely fast speed. These people were abnormally excited, as if this time they were not going to war, but to obtain gold, silver, and treasures. With this kind of marching speed, the advantage was that even if they were discovered, they would not have enough time to prepare for defense. This was also the reason why General Zhang Tseng was so confident in giving the order to attack after knowing that the mercenaries' barracks did not specifically strengthen the defense. Under normal circumstances, such an unforeseen event would be discovered by the scouts first. Then, the scouts would quickly pass the news back. After that, the general who received the news would arrange for the army to prepare for defense. All of this required time. During this time, if the two sides were far away, there would be enough time to prepare. However, when the distance was extremely close, like now with less than an hour, it would be too rushed and even too late. In this way, the success rate of this kind of surprise attack was usually very high. With such a high probability occurrence, and it was against the mercenaries, not only would the chances of victory decrease, it could also cause the battle to go in the other direction. That would be the failure of the ambush. This was what everyone called trying to steal a chicken, only to end up losing the rice used to lure it. Not to mention the mines that were already buried outside the barracks that could allow people to fly into the air. Just inside the barracks alone, Yang Qindong had already given the order to rest and sleep when he knew that the Miao army would pass by the barracks. Thus, other than a few companies that had to be on duty, most of the soldiers had already entered a state of sleep. Just like what Tiger's man had said, the enemy might not really come in the middle of the night. In order to launch a surprise attack, it was very possible that they would come one step earlier. With regards to Tiger's man's analysis, Yang Qindong completely agreed and even felt gratified. A strong army, or even a strong country in the future, could not solely rely on himself. It needed everyone's hard work. Only when more loyal soldiers improved their abilities could they do great things together. Yang Qindong agreed with this analysis. Naturally, the Lung Feng soldiers only rested for half a day. They had already woken up at 7 o'clock in the evening and began to eat the warm meals that they had reheated earlier. They replenished their energy and prepared for the big battle. The entire barracks was quiet, but in fact, a monstrous, murderous aura was forming. However, this kind of murderous aura could not be seen. It could only be felt when one was in the midst of it. It belonged to the kind of existence that could not be seen or touched, not to mention the monstrous, murderous aura. After the 10,000 Miao army rushed for nearly an hour, they could already vaguely see the mercenary barracks outside with torches. It was previously said that whichever army charged in first would be able to obtain more wealth. With such a military order, the army that had just arrived did not even have the time to regroup. Instead, they rushed straight to the front of the barracks like a swarm of bees. Everyone was doing their best at this moment, as if they were afraid that the benefits would not belong to them if they were a step late. Chapter 436. Looking from afar, the frenzied charge looked like waves on the beach. Wave after wave, there was no way to stop or stop them. In the process of charging, battle cries rang out. The torches that were originally unlit lit up one after another. From afar, it looked like the sky was filled with countless stars. What was supposed to come had finally arrived. In the mercenary camp, all the cold vanguard, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers began to gather at an amazing speed. They then took their equipment and weapons and began to gather at various locations according to the military orders they received. More than 7,000 people, almost 7,000 people participated in this battle. Other than the two cold vanguard companies and the first and second teams of guards by Yang Chendong's side, the Wolf Fang Special Forces and the Ghost Sniper team had joined the battle. Obviously, Yang Chendong wanted to show the Miao army how powerful he was once and for all. He wanted them to be afraid of him from now on and not dare to do anything to him. Outside the camp, the battle cries were getting closer and closer, not only in the south. Even the Miao army headquarters in the northwest had sent 10,000 people to cooperate with the joint attack. With 20,000 against 7,000, the advantage was already very obvious. In addition, it was a sneak attack. No matter how one looked at it, there was no possibility of failure. Naturally, the 20,000 Miao army soldiers could see such a simple logic. Therefore, they attacked the mercenary camp with extra force. There was a saying that one would not die if one did not seek death. At this moment, it was the most suitable saying for the Miao army. The charging Miao army soldiers did not know how powerful the opponents they were facing this time were and what kind of training they had to go through. They also did not know that 500 meters away from the camp, there were advanced landmines that could kill them. They had never even heard of this before. Once they stepped on it, it could quickly send them to the sky. Even if they did not shatter into pieces, it was enough to take their lives. Even the people around them could be blown to death by the fireball. It was precisely because of their ignorance and their eagerness to perform meritorious deeds that when the 20,000 Miao soldiers charged over from two different directions like a tidal wave, most of them did not even realize that they were already on the verge of death. All of this was completely reflected in the following battle. When the earth-shattering Miao army or fake Miao army, the ordinary southern Ming people who had no food to eat along the way, arrived 500 meters away from the mercenary camp while shouting excitedly. They were so excited that they thought that the fruits of victory were right in front of them. Then, the first flame lit up. The first landmine exploded. It was especially dazzling in the night. This flame was like a meteor from outer space. Suddenly, a dazzling light flashed. Then, at least 3 or 4 figures rose into the air. Then, more than a dozen figures were blasted to the ground. Yang Chendong provided them with some important books and some finished mines. The carefully selected craftsmen of the munitions factory had finally developed the first batch of mines. However, they did not get the essence of the mines. Although they used a lot of materials, the power was actually much weaker. At least, It was far from being comparable to the landmines in the future. However, all of this did not matter. Firstly, the lack of power could be made up with numbers. Secondly, the Miao army's charge this time was too concentrated. Everyone was basically following each other as they charged forward. Under such a formation, the lethality of the bombs was naturally very dazzling. It was not like the future where the emphasis was on long-range attacks. Even when it was necessary to send an army, it was often infiltrated by small groups of elites. Therefore, in the West where the battles were the most intense, it was considered very effective if a bomb could kill more than 3 people at the same time. It was far from comparable to now, where a bomb could kill more than a dozen people at the same time. Boom! After the first fireball appeared, the second fireball appeared, then the third, and the fourth fireball appeared. Countless balls of light burned, causing countless Miao army soldiers to either die or be heavily injured. When the number of balls of light increased, the number of cries and screams on the battlefield suddenly increased. There were 2 rows of almost 3 landmines. Yang Qindong considered that there were many Han civilians among them and did not want to kill too much. Otherwise, if he made them denser, there would be more fireballs and the lethality would be even greater. Clusters of flames lit up one after another. In the blink of an eye, the first row of landmines had all been passively detonated. Very quickly, the second row of landmines went off as well. Who knew how many people were lifted into the air in despair and died in horror and fear? Why did this happen? Since the first row of landmines had already been detonated and the 2 rows were 20 meters apart, why did the second row of landmines explode? Speaking of which, this was caused by the Miao army's desire for grandiose achievements. If the Miao army had not underestimated the mercenaries and relied on their numbers to attack in a dense formation, this would not have happened. It was because he knew that the mercenaries might have extremely advanced firearms that General Zhang Zeng decided to attack in such a way. In this way, if they were to encounter firearms from afar, they would not be able to kill many with such a dense formation. This allowed them to charge all the way until they entered the camp and engaged in close combat. The scales of victory would naturally tilt towards them. It could not be denied that this might be a way to break through the firearms formation. It was just like when the great Ming dynasty was at its peak. When Zhu Di went out to the grasslands, the firearms team he led had encountered such an attack. For this reason, there were indeed many casualties, and they had paid a great price. Even when Duking Zhangfu had invaded Jiaoji, his firearms unit had also suffered a heavy blow from the Jiaoji army's counterattack. With the experience of his predecessors, the Miao army chose to use this method to break through the firearms formation. However, he did not expect to suffer such a huge loss. It could be said that this was due to the lack of information. If one had carefully studied the firearms of the mercenaries, they would know that the reason why they were called the new model was because their firearms could fire continuously, compared to the great Ming dynasty's flintlocks, which needed to be loaded with gunpowder to fire a shot. This machine gun was much more advanced. Even if there were no landmines with a few powerful machine guns placed here, the effect would still be surprisingly good. There was a saying in the later generations that whoever grasped the information would be one step closer to victory. This saying was also applicable in ancient wars. If one did not even know the details of the opponent and charged rashly, the result of failure was already destined. Without enough attention, an earth-shattering formation would only result in more casualties. When the first ball of fire lit up, the Miao army, who was charging at the front, wanted to stop. After all, the visual impact of that thing was too strong. However, they were at the very front. If they wanted to stop, they would have to ask for the permission of the brothers behind them. Therefore, before they could do anything, a huge force came from behind them, pushing the Miao Jun in front of them forward. Boom, 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 as the explosions continued. The Miao army in the middle finally felt that something was wrong. However, how could they stop when they were charging at such a high speed? Just like that, they pushed their brothers at the front another 20 meters until the second row of mines was triggered. Only then did the army stop charging forward. However, it was also at this time that the Miao army at the back also rushed forward without hesitation, not knowing what was going on. Very good. The second wave of landmines has been triggered. Inform all the warriors that there is no need to follow the previous direction. There are no more landmines in front of us. Everyone, charge! Luo Pa, the commander of the 2nd Cold Vanguard Regiment, who was appointed to be in charge of this battle, used a telescope with night vision to observe the situation on the battlefield. What followed was his excited shouts, followed by the loud sound of the bugle call. A squad of 10 warriors blasted the bugle call. The sound spread out and could be heard clearly on the battlefield. When the bugle call sounded, it meant that the entire army was charging. The moment they heard the bugle call, 7,000 Yang family soldiers rushed out like ferocious tigers with weapons in their hands. It was the same charge, but the Yang army's formation was much more orderly. The first echelon held bows that could shoot up to 100 meters away. Each person had 10 arrows. One could imagine the consequences of throwing the arrows into the air. Each person also had crossbow arrows that could penetrate anything at close range. When they reached a certain distance, it was time for them to show their power. The second echelon held shields and short swords. They could both defend and attack. The third echelon was also the main force of the charge. The steel swords and spears were like a sharp knife that pierced into the enemy's heart. The fourth echelon was mainly used for battlefield rescue. Some of them were carrying a stretcher in pairs, some were holding ropes to tie the captives, and some were holding loudspeakers that could be used for propaganda purposes. Under the protection of 100 fully armed elite Cold Front soldiers who were armed with the Type 95, they walked at the back and did the finishing work. The few echelons advanced in an orderly manner. No matter how fierce the battle was, their footsteps were firm. They were like a human tank rapidly advancing forward. On Miao Juanzhong's side, more than half of the front line was destroyed. Even the middle line was heavily damaged. It was at this moment that the rear line rushed over and collided with the retreating front line and middle line. Get out of the way, retreat. Get out of the way, you cowards. Why are you retreating? Get out of the way, let us charge forward. Idiot, don't you see the fire god showing his power? Why aren't you turning back? Chaos before the battle. This was Miao Juanzhong's performance. The powerful landmines made these uneducated soldiers who did not understand science think that the fire god was showing his power. They were all scared out of their wits. How could they still have the will to fight? Chapter 4:37. Both sides were still pushing and shoving each other, not giving way to each other. Suddenly, arrows fell from the back and landed among the Miao soldiers who were confronting each other. At that moment, many of them were shot and fell to the ground. Where are our archers? Fight back! Seeing the arrows falling from the sky, Zhang Tsung, who was commanding the battle at the back, shouted loudly. Following his shout, some scattered archers also started to fight back. The arrows hit the shields of the Yang family army's second echelon. Other than the sound of impact, there was almost no damage done. After the weak counterattack of the Miao army, the first echelon of the Yang family army took out their crossbows and started to fight back. At a close distance, an arrow was shot, and it was accompanied by the fall of one of the opponents or the scream of another person. The third echelon also took this opportunity to quickly catch up. Then, the swords and spears were swung wildly. How could the frightened Miao army resist? Zhang Tsung was still sitting on his horse and wanted to give orders, but an arrow came out of nowhere and landed on his left shoulder, causing him to cry out in pain. "General, the general is injured. Quick! The general is injured. Protect the general and retreat." The dozens of bodyguards saw that their leader, who was being protected, was also shot and shouted to go forward. Then they pulled him down from the horse and supported him to retreat to the back. Even the bodyguards could see that the front was losing, and even losing, how could Zhang Tsung not see it? Taking this opportunity, he pretended to be deaf and mute. He did not say anything and let everyone support him to retreat to the back. "Those who kneel and surrender can live, otherwise die." The shout from the loudspeaker sounded like it was beside the ears of the chaotic Miao army. That shout stunned many people, and they stood still, not knowing what to do. The fourth echelon of the Yang family army had also arrived. Lien Lungfeng, who was holding the 95 style, finally pulled the trigger. What followed was the scene of people falling to the ground one after another. This sudden gunshot was the last straw that suppressed the chaotic Miao army. The situation of the battlefield was also settled at this moment. The Miao family only had two choices: to retreat or to surrender. Run. Some of the faster Miao Jun soldiers who were at the back immediately turned and ran. Some of the Miao soldiers who wanted to run but were surrounded in the middle were not so lucky. When mercenaries began to appear around them, these people seemed to have only one choice left, which was to kneel down and surrender. The sound of gunfire continued, and the sound of cold weapons clashing could be heard from time to time. However, it was clear that the commotion was getting smaller and smaller. The battle had not even officially started, but it was already heading towards the end in the Miao army's main camp. Although King Miao Jinlong was still sitting at the head of the tent, his expression was obviously not as calm as before. The moment he heard the explosions, he had a bad feeling in his heart. It was just that he didn't want to admit it until he received the battle report from the front line. Reporting. The tent's curtains were pulled open from the outside, and the scout general who rushed in knelt on the ground with a thud. "Reporting to your majesty, our army has been ambushed by the enemy and is retreating in defeat." Ambush? What kind of ambush? Aren't the mercenaries resting and sleeping? Miao Jinlong suddenly stood up from his chair, staring with a pair of red eyes as he spoke in a cold voice. "We still need to find out the details, but the fact that the army is retreating is a fact. Please end it quickly, your majesty." The scout general did not know how to explain what he had seen. He only remembered that the moment the fire flashed, his eyes seemed to have gone blurry. Then, not long after, he saw the Miao army frantically retreating. "If you can't find out, what's the use of having you?" Hearing his subordinate's reply, Miao Jinlong was furious. Although he had already felt that something was wrong, when the answer came out, he realized that he could not take it anymore. Miao Jinlong was so angry that he lost his composure. Fortunately, Scholar Zoda's mind was not messed up. After all, this was the outcome that he had expected. However, his words carried little weight, and he could not stop it. In addition, he also wanted Zhang Tsung to suffer a great loss so that he would not continue to be so arrogant in the future. Now that he saw that the front line had indeed lost, he stepped out from the ranks and said to Miao Jinlong, "Your Majesty, since the front line has lost, you should immediately send a general to receive them and reduce the losses. At the same time, close the camp gates and prepare for defense. This is the safest way." When Miao Jinlong heard Zoda's words, he was like a drowning man who had grabbed onto a piece of deadwood, nodding his head like a chick pecking at rice. "Not bad, not bad. Go and prepare according to what Scholar Zo said." This was the strategy that they had discussed before. After all, planning for defeat before planning for victory was also the art of war. Of course, these suggestions were put forward by Zoda. It was also under his persuasion that the Miao army only sent out 20,000 men this time. Otherwise, they might have sent out even more people, and naturally, the losses would be even greater. With Miao Jinlong's orders, the Miao army camp quickly moved. Those who were supposed to save people went to save people, and those who were supposed to defend the camp tightened their defense. At least, they did not lose their composure during the chaos. More importantly, Kuang Yi, who was originally looking for an opportunity to send out troops, could not find a suitable opportunity. Kuang Yi could see that the Miao army wanted to attack the camp. It was because of this that he thought of what he should do. For example, if the mercenaries lost, they would have to defend the city gates. On the other hand, if the mercenaries won, could he also take the initiative to attack? For example, he could directly attack the Miao army camp and capture, or kill Miao Jinlong. Between the two options, he also made preparations for the second option. With his understanding of the mercenaries, of course, he thought that Yang Qindong had a higher chance of winning this battle. The reality was as such. After a series of explosions and sparks, the Miao army lost. As such, Kuang Yi urgently sent people out of the city to watch every movement of the Miao army camp. At the same time, other than leaving a portion of the troops to Guaning to defend the city, General Ma Wei and General Yu Guang were gathered by him to prepare 1,000 soldiers to attack the camp. Unfortunately, the number of troops was still too little. After receiving the news that the Miao army camp was not in chaos and that the defense was orderly, Kuang Yi could only give up on the idea of military action with a face of disappointment. Firstly, his troops were too little. Using 1,000 to attack the enemy's camp of 60,000 was no different from seeking death. Secondly, he did not inform Yang Qindong in advance. If he rashly attacked without any support, it was very likely that he would not be able to return. Kuang Yi stopped all military operations and only sent out scouts to investigate the situation outside. He still had a glimmer of hope, and that was whether the mercenaries would take the opportunity to attack the Miao army's main camp. If that was the case, he would definitely intervene. To Kuang Ye's disappointment, the mercenaries did not intend to attack the Miao army camp. They only rushed out for 2 miles before stopping. Following that, they turned back to clean up the spoils of war. Groups of captives were tied up with ropes and brought back to the mercenaries' camp. Piles of fire were set ablaze, directly igniting the corpses of the dead Miao army soldiers. This was not to destroy the corpses, but to prevent any plague from spreading after so many people died. Zhang Tsing still managed to escape, along with 8,000 Miao army soldiers. When they retreated back to the Miao army camp in shock, their legs seemed to be filled with lead, and they could not move a single step. Just like that, they sat on the ground with a plop. The soldiers could act like a bear, but as a general, Zhang Tsung could not. He scrambled into the main tent and knelt in front of Miao Jinlong, begging for punishment. Looking at Zhang Tsung, who still had an injury on his left shoulder, although Miao Jinlong was filled with hatred, he did not punish him too much. This was a general who started the war with him, a meritorious subject, and the purest of the Miao people. Thus, after reprimanding him, he let him go to recuperate. Regarding Miao Jinlong's nostalgia, Zoda, who was watching from the side, admired and hated him at the same time. He admired a master who was loyal, and that was the goal he should follow closely. If he followed such a person, at least he would not have to worry about being heartlessly abandoned. What he hated was that he placed too much emphasis on relationships, and that it would be difficult for him to achieve great things. Zoda was still analyzing Miao Jinlong's character and his strengths and weaknesses when one of the kings of the Miao tribe spoke to him. "Mr. Zhou, this time our Miao army has suffered a great loss. In your opinion, what should we do next?" "King," Zhou quickly retracted his wandering thoughts and changed to a very serious expression. After tonight's incident, we have already seen the strength of the mercenaries, and they are indeed very strong. It is better not to go head-to-head with such an opponent. Otherwise, it will hurt the king's foundation. It is better to focus on defense first, then report this matter, and let King Min handle everything. Are we going to admit this loss just like that? Miao Jinlong asked with a trace of unwillingness. Of course we can't just admit it like that. However, if we do our best to fight the mercenaries and cause both sides to suffer losses, I am afraid that we will fall into the hands of some people. It is not a good thing to injure 1,000 of the enemy and 800 of our own. It is better to deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo and look for opportunities to plan slowly. How could Zhou not see that this was Miao Jinlong's performance? He clearly saw the power of the mercenaries and did not want to be enemies with them, but he was worried that others would say that he was a coward. Since that was the case, he would help him find an excuse and find a way out. Zhou had lived in the Miao tribe for so many years, and he indeed understood the situation well enough. Just this sentence alone was enough to see through Miao Jinlong's thoughts. At the same time, he could not help but nod his head, and his originally cold expression eased a lot. Chapter 438. He was not the only king in the Miao tribe. Just this time, there were 3 powerful armies that followed the king of Min's army. They were Yang Wenbo, the head of the Miao tribe in Dumeng village, Wu Yingtu, and himself. Speaking of which, the strength of these 2 groups was not weak. If he were to be heavily injured and let them know, they would probably rejoice in his misfortune. He would definitely not do something that would hurt his loved ones and make his enemies happy. Okay, Scholar Zhou is right. Since that is the case, immediately give the order to lock down the camp gate. Soldiers are not allowed to enter or leave without orders. At the same time, report this matter to the King of Min and ask for support. Originally, Miao Jinlong just wanted to find a way out. Now that the excuse had appeared, Miao Jinlong used it as an excuse. After this order was given, the camp with less than 70,000 Miao soldiers quickly quietened down. Regardless of whether it was the mercenaries or the South Ming army, they were all waiting for Miao Jun's reaction. From their point of view, it was normal for Miao Jun, who had suffered a loss, to calm down. However, it was also normal for him to retaliate crazily in anger. But no matter what it was, they wouldn't back down. They would deal with it as it came. Of course, if they had a choice, it was better not to use their weapons. After all, from a certain point of view, Miao Jun was only the auxiliary force of the king of Min's army. Even if they were eliminated, it would not be of much use. Instead, it would attract the king of Min's army to surround and attack them, of course, unless they had enough power to fight them head-on. That would be a completely different attitude and thinking. They closely observed Miao Jun's movements. When the sun rose, Miao Jun suddenly quietened down. This was both reasonable and unexpected, but no matter what, now that they were quiet, everyone was temporarily safe. Kuang Yi, who stood on the top floor of Gaozhou's capital city, finally heaved a sigh of relief. Actually, he had a worry that he did not say out loud. That was, Miao Jun saw that the mercenaries were powerful and could not be provoked. Would he attack them in anger? If so, they had to be on guard. Teacher, the sun is up. Miao Jun will not attack the city again. You have also stayed here for a night. Go back and have a good rest. Looking at Kuang Yi, who was over 60 years old, Guaning, as a student, said with a heartache, "He." There was a smile on Kuang Ye's lips. Although he had stayed up all night, he did not seem to be in low spirits. Instead, he turned to Guaning and said, "You see, this is the strength of the mercenaries." They had nearly 3 times the number of people, and they used a night attack, yet they still did not gain the slightest advantage. Tell me, why is the court not willing to put such a good general in an important position? Teacher, His Majesty must have his own considerations. You should go and rest first. How could Guan Ying not know the meaning behind Kuang Ye's words? In fact, when he first heard that Yang Chendong also wanted the title of king with a different surname, he was also very angry. In his view, this was not a display of loyalty at all. But after thinking about it, Yang Chendong wasn't completely someone from the southern Ming Empire. If it wasn't for the emperor's invitation, he wouldn't even care about the chaos in Guangdong. Now that the chaos in Guangdong had been resolved, if they wanted them to resolve the chaos in Yunnan, how could they not pay a price? If he was Yang Chendong, he would probably also make some requests, even some excessive ones. This was because looking at a problem from a different perspective would lead to different results. For example, if two people were looking at the same palm, you would look at the palm, and the other would look at the back of the hand. Their feelings would naturally be different. There was no such thing as absolute right or wrong. Although Guan Ying knew that Yang Chendong's request was somewhat excessive, even demanding an exorbitant price, but looking at the current situation, it seemed that other than him, it would be very difficult for others to turn the situation around in a short period of time. It seemed that there was already a king with a different surname. Yang Chendong's request, for one, also didn't seem to be too excessive. Let's not talk about how Guan Ying looked at Yang Chendong first. Let's talk about how when he helped his teacher Kuang Yi down the tower to rest, the sixth young master was not idle at all in his own camp. The battle had already ended, and under the efficient operation of the Yang family army, the cleaning of the battlefield was also nearing completion. The battle statistics were also reported under the cooperation of the regiment political commissar, the battalion instructor, and the battalion instructor. Right now, it was placed on the table in front of him. Last night's battle was a battle with preparation, which was why they achieved such a glorious result. On the battlefield, they killed more than 5,000 enemies, captured nearly 7,000, and only about 8,000 escaped. To be able to achieve such a result with 7,000 soldiers on the battlefield, it was indeed very gratifying and could be considered a great victory. But when he saw the losses on the Yang family army's side, Yang Chendong still couldn't feel happy. Not for other reasons, but because it was written that 3 of the Cold Front Army soldiers were injured, 2 of the auxiliary soldiers were heavily injured, and 20 of the auxiliary soldiers were injured. 60 of the auxiliary soldiers were killed, 30 of them were heavily injured, and 300 of them were lightly injured. When the loss of nearly 100 people and more than 300 injured people was reported to Yang Chendong, his face sank unconsciously. This was a battle with preparation, especially when the mines were absolutely effective, but they still paid such a huge price. This made Yang Chendong realize that using cold weapons against cold weapons wasn't very reliable. In the past, the Yang family army could be said to have won every battle. Even when they faced the 100,000 Huang bandit army, they didn't suffer such great losses. All of this was because of the superiority of their weapons. This time, Yang Chendong intended to remove the new guns, wanting to see the effects of cold weapons, but the results were obviously not very satisfactory. Perhaps some people said that under the same cold weapons, they defeated 20,000 enemies with less than 400 casualties, and captured 7,000. No matter how one looked at it, it was a victory. This saying couldn't be said to be wrong, but at least it didn't apply to the Yang family army. What kind of people were the Yang family army, and what kind of training did they undergo? Not to mention the elite Cold Front Army and the auxiliary soldiers. Even the auxiliary soldiers had undergone strict training. Quite a few of them had performed well in the forest battle exercise a while ago. But now, some of them had died on the battlefield, and there was nothing left. After such a great sacrifice, the soldiers had died before they even reached the real battlefield. How could anyone be happy? China's history had already proven that they preferred to be kind like water, which meant that they didn't rush things. They were used to slowly changing others and stabilizing their own power. This was also the main reason why most of the founding emperors weren't young. Logically speaking, with Yang Qindong's age and the current situation, if he performed well and was conferred the title of king, it wasn't impossible for him to spy on the entire great Ming dynasty. On the contrary, he had a high chance of success, and it wasn't impossible for him to become the founding emperor of a generation. However, this method of boiling the frog in warm water wasn't what Yang Qindong wanted. He, who was familiar with history, knew very well what would happen in the future. He also knew that in a few years, the backbone of the Han people would be broken by a few 100,000 people. Then, they would rule for hundreds of years until the unforgettable 1840, when the backbone of the Qing dynasty was broken. That was more than 100 years of humiliation for the Han people. Even if great people appeared later on, it was extremely difficult to restore the prosperity of the past. The world structure had already been formed, and if they wanted to walk out, even a small step would be very difficult. Yang Qindong, who was once a soldier, understood this history too well. Chapter 439. Early in the morning, in the courtyard of the mercenary camp, 7,000 Yang family soldiers stood in their respective lines. In front of them were the corpses of 63 temporary auxiliary soldiers. Beside them, there were a few dozen heavily injured comrades carried on stretchers, as well as hundreds of others wrapped in bandages. These were the soldiers who had died in the battle last night. Now, all the dead soldiers had been carried out, and the corpses had been put on some simple makeup to make them look less tragic. The other injured comrades were scattered around. This scene stunned all the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers except for the elite soldiers' cold vanguard. Their faces were filled with confusion. Lung Feng naturally knew what was going on. In the previous battle on Ryukyu Island, there were also examples of comrades sacrificing themselves. The auxiliary soldiers were a little better. Most of them had heard about the death ceremony when they joined the army in Crimson City. It was said that this ceremony would allow their souls to ascend to heaven and stop suffering. They even said that this ceremony was called a memorial service. They had only heard about it, but had never actually experienced it. The temporary auxiliary soldiers were completely stunned. They had never heard of it and had never seen it with their own eyes. At this moment, they stood there with a look of confusion. Perhaps in their minds, they had clearly won a great victory last night. So why did they make everyone look so solemn? What was going on? In the eyes of others, defeating 20,000 enemies with less than 400 casualties, killing 5,000, and capturing 7,000 was naturally a great victory. But in Lung Feng's eyes, this victory was nothing. Fortunately, most of them had used cold weapons yesterday. If they had used the 9-5 sword, this battle would not have been considered a victory. At most, it would have been a draw. The Yang family soldiers were all gathered here. At the same time, the 7,000 captives were all escorted here. According to Yang Qindong, this was a pre-battle education. If this method was used well, it would have an unexpected effect. Everyone was present. The commander of Lung Feng's 2nd Regiment, Luo Pe, ran in front of Yang Qindong, who was in his commander's uniform, and gave a very standard military salute. Comrade Commander, all the members of the memorial service have gathered. Please give your instructions. Please be at ease. Yang Qindong said, solemnly. He put on the marshal's uniform that he had kept in the large warehouse to show his respect for this ceremony. Just like Luo Pa and the group of officers, they had also changed out of their combat camouflage uniforms and put on regular clothes to show their solemnity and might. In fact, after these officers changed into their normal uniforms, they did indeed look very impressive. Many of the soldiers who were charging towards the imperial army made up their minds to perform well in the future and get themselves an official uniform. How impressive would it be when they returned to their hometowns? As for Yang Chendong, when he strode to the center of the temporary stage, the entire camp fell silent. At that moment, there was only one person in the eyes of tens of thousands of people. There was only one sound in the ears of tens of thousands of people, and that was Yang Chendong and what he was about to say. Dear comrades did not use a script. Yang Chendong chose to give an impromptu speech. Fortunately, he had experienced many such occasions in his previous life, so he already had a rough idea of what to say. However, it was a different era. Today, he used a practical speech. The target scanned the entire place, not even letting go of the Miao army captives who were still tied up. Then he said in a solemn voice, Dear comrades, last night the Miao army suddenly launched a fierce attack on our camp. In the face of the test of life and death, all of you made a heroic performance and handed in a perfect answer sheet. Relying on your courage, you defeated your opponents and won the victory. You are the best, and I am proud to have all of you. Salute. First of all, the victory of last night was affirmed. This made all the soldiers who participated in the battle puff out their chests. Everyone's face was filled with pride. But Yang Chendong's tone changed, and his voice became a lot deeper. Some of our dear comrades and brothers sacrificed their lives to protect their dignity in the battle last night. They sacrificed their lives in exchange for victory. It is because of their heroic sacrifice that we have achieved our glorious and great victory. Today, we are deeply mourning our beloved comrades. They are Zhang Hongdong from 1st Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Li Kaixian from 2nd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Ren Zhuzi from 2nd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st Platoon, 2nd Company of the 1st Auxiliary Battalion. Yang Weisong from 3rd Platoon, 1st Company of the 1st 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 Platoon, 1st Company of the 63 names were read out by Yang Chendong one by one. Every time he read out a name, a soldier's corpse behind him would be covered with a white sheet. When he finished reading out all the names, there were already soft sobbing sounds coming from the scene. This time, if Zhu Qizhen of Ying sect had not been hot-headed and wanted to levy heavy taxes in the southwest to support his new army to fight the northern Ming, they would not have suddenly launched an attack under the King of Min's persuasion if they were not forced to the point where they could not survive. In the end, they did not have any ill feelings towards the Great Ming. It was just that their living conditions were too bad, and they had no choice but to rebel. Chapter 440. However, regardless of whether they were 100% Miao people or not, they rarely came into contact with war. It was only because they were Miao people that they were valued and trusted more by Miao Jinlong. Hence, they were in a better position during the war. However, when it came to knowledge, they were no different from the other people of the Great Ming Dynasty. Just like the scene in front of them, they were also shocked. Although their hands were tied, it did not prevent them from widening their eyes to look at everything in front of them. They wanted to see what these mercenaries were up to, under the gaze of more than 10,000 people, Yang Qindong finished reading the eulogy. Then he took off his military cap and shouted to the audience, "Fire the gun and mourn for our dead comrades for 3 minutes." After that, Yang Qindong was the first to take the initiative to lower his head, followed by Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others beside him. Then it was Commander Luo Pa, Political Commissar Kong Jie, and a group of Lung Feng auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers. More than 7,000 people lowered their heads at the same time to mourn for their dead comrades. The scene was so grand and solemn that it shocked the 7,000 captives. At this moment, their hearts seemed to have been pierced deeply by something, making it difficult for them to breathe. Bang, bang, bang. Captain Xiu Vi of the 1st Guard Unit and Captain Dao Shao of the 2nd Guard Unit led a group of team members and began to fire the gun, sending their comrades on their way to heaven under the sound of gunfire. Especially the continuous firing of bullets, the 7,000 captives received a re-education process in their hearts. Come, cremate the 63 martyrs and send their bones back to the Monument of Heroes in the city. In the future, they will forever be worshipped by future generations. Their names will also be engraved on the heroes list for their descendants to pay homage to and for the world to remember. Under Yang Qindong's roar, piles of torches were lit and the 63 corpses were burning. No one knew if it was an illusion, but at this moment, many people seemed to see a breeze blowing over these burning corpses. It was as if their souls were really liberated, either going to heaven or reincarnating to a better world. The memorial service was over, but the significance of this symbol was far from over. This was equivalent to a big lesson, and every step was deeply knocked on everyone's heart. At this moment, it seemed that the onlookers were no longer afraid of death. In their minds, after death, their souls had a place to stay. What was there to be afraid of? Soldiers dying on the battlefield, wasn't this a kind of fate? On the contrary, what if they did not die and could survive? Didn't that mean that there would be more good days in the future? Even if they were dead, their families would have someone to rely on. Furthermore, their chances of survival were still very high. At this moment, all the soldiers to the army's morale, at this moment, the entire army's army. The memorial service was also a shock to the 7,000 captives. They had never seen or even heard of such a ceremony before, and it deeply stimulated them. Qiu, Qiu with Qiu, Qiu with Qiu to percent V, Qiu with Qiu, Qiu, Qiu. After all, they were about to expand into the southwest region. If they had the help of these locals, especially the Miao people, they would be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. Yang Qindong already had such a plan, and Kong Jie had volunteered. There was no reason for him to refuse. With a wave of his hand, he indicated that as long as they had a clean background and weren't evil people, he would consider taking them in as temporary auxiliary soldiers. At the same time, he promised them that if they performed well, they would be given the same opportunity to compete with other temporary auxiliary soldiers. Kong Jie, who had been thinking about the situation, left to carry out the order. Then, with the instructors and company instructors as the backbone, and some soldiers who were good at talking, they formed small groups and went deep into the captives. They began to investigate the past of these captives and filter out potential recruits. Under such a strong psychological attack, the Han people who originally did not have much of a sense of belonging quickly accepted the change. Once the first step was taken, the rest of the matters would be easy to handle. Not long after, the captive soldiers began to change their allegiance. Even some of the Miao people were convinced by them. Perhaps they knew from the start that no matter who became the emperor and conquered the country, it would not have much to do with them. Since that was the case, they might as well follow the mercenaries in front of them. They had heard from the auxiliary soldiers of Lung Feng that their families were living a rich and beautiful life. Some of the things that came out of their mouths were things that the captives had never even heard of before. However, when they saw these people describing everything with a straight face, and everyone saying more or less the same thing, they believed them. Not to mention that what was said was true, even if it was a lie. It was not uncommon for it to become true after a lot of people said it. Of course, not everyone could be taken in as temporary auxiliary soldiers. After investigating and encouraging people to report and expose them, they still found some people with bad natures. Among them were Miao people and Han people. Not long ago, when they attacked the cities of the southern Ming dynasty, they did many bad things like burning, killing, and looting. Once these people were found, Kong Jie would sentence them according to their evil deeds. In Qiqian City, the relevant laws were gradually being perfected. There were also some rules that stated what kind of crime a person committed and what kind of punishment they would receive. According to this request, the punishment was placed on these villains. Immediately, more than 100 people were sentenced to death, and more than 600 people were sentenced to reform through labor for different terms. Those who were sentenced to death were directly executed in the military camp. Over 100 swords fell, and over 100 heads fell to the ground. Over 100 people died. As for those who were reformed through labor, they were all escorted to Laizhou Prefecture behind them. At the border of the coast, the Yangtze Navy had already sent ships to wait there. They brought over many new weapons and ammunition from the munitions factory. Other than these 600-plus criminals who had done something wrong, there were also over 1,000 Han and Miao people who did not want to join the temporary auxiliary army because they did not meet the requirements or did not understand the situation. These people would all be sent to the small glass island. When they arrived there, those who should serve their sentences would serve their sentences and atone for their sins through labor. The others would also be sent to other units and factories that needed them. In the end, out of the 7,000 captives, only 5,000 were allowed to join the temporary auxiliary soldiers. Even so, this result was enough to make Yang Qindong very satisfied. After a battle, they had learned a lesson and experience. The strength of the military had also been strengthened. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. At the same time, the 5,000 people who were accepted were also very happy, not to mention what they had learned in the past few days that made them have a good impression of the mercenaries. Just the basic necessities of life had greatly improved. They just casually took one out. The shoes they usually wore were straw sandals. In the Ming dynasty, only officials and rich people could wear leather boots or long boots. In the 25th year of Hanggu, the imperial court further decreed that commoners, merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, and odd-job workers were strictly prohibited from wearing boots. They could only wear leather boots. Only in the cold northern regions were they allowed to wear leather boots. Those who disobeyed would be punished with death. As for the ordinary commoners, they mainly wore straw sandals and leather boots. They were just ordinary shoes and leggings. Walking with such shoes naturally wouldn't be a problem. However, if one wanted to travel for a long time, it would easily cause problems. Many times when one went on a long journey, one would have to bring several pairs of shoes. There was no guarantee that they wouldn't break or that there wouldn't be a time when one was barefoot. Let's look at what kind of shoes the mercenaries wore. Forget about cloth shoes. The lowest were rubber shoes. The garment factory copied the rubber shoes provided by Yang Qindong. Due to the seriousness of the people at that time, coupled with the fact that there wasn't a trace of laziness in the workmanship, such shoes were much sturdier. The more powerful ones, like the elite soldiers of the Cold Vanguard, wore high-waisted leather boots. They would even dare to charge through a mountain of blades and a sea of flames. Once a temporary auxiliary soldier joined, they would immediately be given 2 pairs of rubber shoes the size of their feet and a set of extremely resistant green training uniform without any military rank. Just based on this, who knew how many people were attracted to this place? This was all caused by poverty. If the commoners were wealthy and accustomed to a stable life, then even if someone wanted to rebel, they wouldn't be able to do much. Speaking of which, in terms of lessons and experience, after a cold weapon battle, Yang Qindong saw his own shortcomings. When the weapons used by everyone weren't too different, no matter how well prepared you were, there would still be casualties on the battlefield. Thus, how to prevent such a thing from happening became a problem that Yang Qindong had to seriously consider. After calling over Commander Luo Pe of the 2nd Cold Vanguard Regiment and Commander Lu Zhua of the Auxiliary Regiment, they finally decided after a round of discussion. In the future, whenever there was a war, the Cold Vanguard Regiment wouldn't need to use any cold weapons to fight. They would directly use the Type 95 to overwhelm the enemy, except for special circumstances. As for the auxiliary soldiers, they would be allocated a Type 81 assault rifle in normal times, while the other 2 would use strong crossbows. During wartime, each person would have a crossbow. In short, they would be able to protect themselves and kill the enemy. As for the temporary auxiliary soldiers, their loyalty had yet to be tested, and their strength had yet to be proven. Thus, they could only be given some steel knives and spears. Of course, the quality of these steel knives was different from the ones used by the Ming dynasty soldiers. They were also harder. In fact, when they were fighting, they might even be able to chop the opponent's large knife in half and gain the advantage. Since it was a battlefield, there would always be casualties. A temporary auxiliary soldier was like a big fish that had to jump through the gate. Only when you fully displayed your advantages and truly gained everyone's recognition would you be able to become an official auxiliary soldier and enjoy the qualifications to use advanced firearms. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.